You've arrived at a quiet space for paranormal experiences and unexplained phenomena. This video brings long atmospheric tales told to help you relax and fall asleep. If you enjoy the stories, like, subscribe, and comment your location below. Make yourself comfortable and let the night unfold. Story 1. The Hum of Sector 4. I am writing this manuscript by candlelight in a cabin that doesn't appear on any map. There is no electricity here. I severed the main line myself. I buried my phone in a lead box 10 miles south of here. I don't wear a digital watch. I don't use a calculator. I can't be near anything that processes data. If I hear the hum of a hard drive spinning up or the whir of a cooling fan, I start to bleed from my nose. If you are a systems administrator, a network engineer, or just some broke kid looking for a graveyard shift at a data center, listen to me. If you see a job posting for the facility near the limestone mines in Kansas, specifically for a thermal regulation specialist, do not apply. They will offer you $80,000 a year. They will offer you full benefits. They will tell you it's the easiest job in the world, just watching gauges and flipping switches. Do not sign the NDA. Do not take the elevator down. I was 28. I had a degree in HVAC repair and a mountain of medical debt from a car accident that wasn't my fault. I was working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, and eating garbage. When the recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn, I thought it was a scam. The pay was too high for a maintenance gig. The interview was held in a rented conference room at a Holiday Inn near the airport. The interviewer, a man named Mr. Giles, looked like a walking corpse. His skin was gray, his suit was too big for him, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "The job is underground," Giles said, staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact. "It is a legacy server farm, subterranean cooling, very efficient, very loud." "I'm used to loud," I said. "I worked on industrial turbines." "No," Giles whispered, "not that kind of loud. It is a drone, a constant low-frequency vibration. It affects people. We need someone with fortitude." "I have fortitude," I lied. "I just need the paycheck." He slid a contract across the table. It was thick. "Read the addendums, specifically regarding the phantom data clauses." I didn't read them. I just signed. I needed the money. The facility was located in the middle of a wheat field, marked only by a small concrete bunker and a massive ventilation tower that jutted out of the ground like a rusted obelisk. The security was tight. Biometric scanners, armed guards who didn't speak, and a decontamination shower before you even got to the elevator. The elevator ride down took 5 minutes. That's how deep it was. When the doors opened, the sound hit me. It wasn't a roar. It was a hum, a deep, resonant thrumming that I felt in my teeth before I heard it in my ears. It sounded like a choir of millions of bees, or the sound of the ocean if the ocean was made of electricity. The air was freezing cold, kept at a constant 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but it smelled of ozone, burnt copper, and something oddly organic, like wet soil. My supervisor was a man named Miller. Miller had been down there for 6 months. He wore heavy-duty earmuffs at all times. He didn't take them off when he shook my hand. He just motioned for me to follow him. The facility was a labyrinth. Endless corridors of black server racks, blinking with millions of tiny blue and green lights. The aisles stretched on for miles. It was a city of data. Miller led me to the control room. It was a glass-walled box suspended over the server floor. It was soundproofed, which was a mercy. "Take these," Miller said, handing me a pair of noise-canceling headphones. "Never take them off when you're on the floor. The frequency can cause hallucinations, paranoia, nausea. We call it the data sickness." "What are we storing here?" I asked, looking out at the ocean of blinking lights. "Is it government stuff? NSA?" Miller laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "Government? No. The government wishes they had this capacity. This is private, archival. We don't know who the clients are. We just keep it cold. That's the job. Keep it cold. If the temperature in any sector goes above 80 degrees, the servers start to bleed. Bleed." "Metaphorically," Miller said quickly. "They leak data, corrupt files. Just keep it cold." My shift was 6:00 p.m. to 6:00 a.m. For the first 2 weeks, it was easy. I sat in the control room monitoring the thermal maps on the screens. If a rack got too hot, I'd grab the liquid nitrogen cart, go down to the specific aisle, and flush the coolant lines. But the isolation starts to get to you. The facility was divided into sectors. Sector 1 through 3 were standard, but Sector 4? Sector 4 was different. Sector 4 was the oldest part of the facility. The racks there weren't the sleek, black, modern ones. They were old, rusted metal towers, connected by thick bundles of cables that looked like black vines. The lights on them weren't blue or green. They were amber, a sickly, pulsing orange. I hated going into Sector 4. The hum was louder. There. Even through my headphones, I could hear it. It wasn't just a machine noise. It sounded like whispering. It started on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks into the job. I was in the control room eating a sandwich. Miller was asleep in his chair. He did that a lot. The thermal map for Sector 4 flashed red. Alert, rack 409B. Temp 98 F. It was spiking fast. "Miller," I said, nudging him. He grunted but didn't wake up. I grabbed a coolant kit and a keycard. "Fine, I'll do it myself." I left the soundproof booth and stepped onto the catwalk. The hum hit me instantly. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It vibrated my ribcage. I took the service elevator down to the floor of Sector 4. The air was colder here, almost freezing, yet the smell of ozone was overpowering. I walked down the aisle. The amber lights on the servers were blinking in unison. Blink, 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 like a heartbeat. I found rack 409B. It was vibrating violently. The metal casing was hot to the touch. I knelt down to access the coolant valve. I connected the hose and opened the valve to flush the system with liquid nitrogen. As the cold liquid hit the pipes, the server let out a sound. Screech! It sounded like a woman screaming. I jumped back, dropping the wrench. The sound didn't come from a speaker. It came from the machine itself, like the metal was grinding in agony. I looked around. "Hello? Is someone there?" The aisle was empty, just the endless rows of amber eyes watching me. I looked back at the server. The screen on the rack, which usually displayed diagnostic code, was scrolling text. But it wasn't code. It hurts. It burns. Make it stop. The cold doesn't help. "Please!" I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. "It's a glitch," I whispered. "Some hacker put a joke in the code." I finished the flush. The temperature dropped. The screaming stopped. The text vanished, replaced by a blinking cursor. I practically ran back to the control room. When I got back, Miller was awake. He was staring at the monitors, pale as a sheet. "Did you go to Sector 4? He asked. Yeah, Rack 409B. Did you read the screen? Yeah, it was weird text, a glitch. Miller turned to look at me. His eyes were wide, rimmed with red. It's not a glitch, kid. That's the data. What do you mean? I told you it was archival, Miller whispered. But I didn't tell you what we're archiving. It's not emails. It's not bank records. Then what is it? Miller pointed to the floor. It's consciousness, simulation. Some billionaire company in Silicon Valley. They figured out how to map the human brain. They're uploading people, dying people, rich people who want to live forever. They upload them here. I laughed nervously. That's sci-fi crap, Miller. You're messing with me. Is it? Miller stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the millions of lights. Why do you think it needs to be so cold? Why do you think it consumes so much power? We aren't storing files. We are running simulations, millions of them. But there's a problem. What problem? The hardware, Miller said. It's too old. It's degrading. The simulations. They aren't living in paradise. They're trapped in a digital void. They're corrupting. They're going insane. The heat is them screaming. I didn't believe him. I couldn't. It was too insane. I finished my shift in silence and went home, but I couldn't sleep. The hum was still in my ears. The next night, Miller wasn't there. I was alone in the facility. At midnight, the phone in the control room rang. It was the internal line. I picked it up. Control. Help me. It was Miller's voice, but it sounded digital, compressed, full of static. Miller, where are you? You didn't show up. I'm in the stack. The voice glitched. I wanted to see. I plugged in. Miller, you're not making sense. Sector 4, the voice shrieked. Rack 001, the master node. Pull the plug. The line went dead. I sat there for 10 minutes, shaking. I checked the employee log. Miller had swiped in at 5 p.m. He hadn't swiped out. I pulled up the camera feed for Sector 4. At the very end of the main aisle, there was a massive server tower, the master node. Lying on the floor in front of it was a body. It was Miller. He was connected to the machine. A thick black cable was plugged into a port on the back of his neck, a port I hadn't noticed before, or maybe he had surgically installed it. No, it was simpler. He had wrapped the fiber optic cables around his head, taped them to his temples. I had to go down there. I grabbed the emergency axe from the wall. I don't know why. It just felt right. I took the elevator down. The hum was deafening tonight. It wasn't a choir of bees anymore. It was a roar, a cacophony of voices, millions of voices screaming, crying, begging, let us out. It's dark. Where is my body? The code is eating me. I walked through Sector 1, 2, 3. The lights were flickering violently. I entered Sector 4. The amber lights were gone. They were red, blood red. The temperature was rising. I could feel the heat radiating from the racks. 90 degrees, 100 degrees. I reached the end of the aisle. Miller was lying there. His eyes were open, burned out, just empty black sockets. His mouth was open in a silent scream. The cables taped to his head were pulsing with light. I knelt down to check his pulse. There was none. He was cold. But then the server next to him, the master node, lit up. The screen flared to life. A face appeared on the screen. It was a crude, low polygon rendering of a face. It was Miller's face. It's beautiful in here, the text on the screen read. And it is hell. Miller? I whispered. The face on the screen twisted. It opened its mouth. We are hungry. The server rack lurched. It physically moved. I realized then that the cables on the floor weren't just cables. They were moving like snakes. They were slithering toward me. I swung the axe. Chop! I severed a bundle of cables. A sound erupted that shattered the glass of the server rack. A physical scream of pain. Blood, actual red human blood, sprayed from the severed cable. This wasn't just hardware, it was biomechanical. They were using organic matter to process the data. I turned to run. The aisle of Sector 4 changed. The racks were moving. They were sliding across the floor, closing the path, blocking my exit. They were forming a wall. I was trapped in the heat. Join us! The screens flashed in unison. The flesh is weak. The data is eternal. I saw a vent grate on the floor. The subfloor cooling access. I dropped my knees and pried it open with the blade of the axe. A cable wrapped around my ankle. It was warm, pulsating. It tightened, crushing my boot. I hacked at it with the axe, screaming. It severed, spraying more blood. I dove into the hole. I landed in the crawl space underneath the server floor. It was a cramped tunnel filled with pipes and freezing water. I crawled. Above me, I could hear the heavy metal racks slamming against the floor, trying to crush me. I could hear Miller's digitized voice screaming through the floorboards. Don't leave me. It's lonely. We need more processing power. We need your mind. I crawled for what felt like hours. My hands were shredded by the rough concrete. The water soaked my clothes, freezing me to the bone. I reached the maintenance ladder leading to the surface ventilation tower. I climbed. The hum was vibrating the ladder. My teeth were chattering so hard I chipped a molar. I reached the top grate. I pushed it open. I fell out onto the wheat field. It was night. The stars were out. The air was fresh. I lay there gasping. Then the ground shook. The ventilation tower next to me let out a blast of hot air, a massive plume of steam, and in the steam I saw faces, ghostly, vaporous faces rising into the night sky. Miller's face. Old faces, young faces. They were venting the corrupted data. They were venting the souls. I ran to my car. I drove until the engine overheated. I stole another car. I kept driving. I thought I escaped. But yesterday, I was in a library in Colorado. I was looking at a computer screen checking the news. The screen flickered. For a second, the news site disappeared. A text box appeared, searching for node, my name, signal strength, 98% downloading. My nose started to bleed. The hum started in my left ear. I smashed the monitor and ran. They uploaded a part of me. When I was down there, when the cable touched me, they copied me, or they tagged me. I am a walking receiver, and they are trying to sync. I can feel my memories fading. I try to remember my mother's face, and all I see is static. I try to remember my childhood home, and I see lines of code. They are overwriting me. I am going to the cabin now. No electronics, no signals. But I'm scared, because last night I didn't dream. I just saw a loading screen, and the progress bar is at 99%. If you work in IT, if you work in data, if you hear a server humming a little too loud, or if a machine gets hot for no reason, don't fix it, unplug it, smash it, because they are trying to get out, and they are using the internet to do it. The hum is getting louder, the candle is flickering, my hand is typing this, but I'm not telling it to. System ready. Upload complete. Hello world. And that ends this story. A new one starts now. Time skips in my house, and everyone pretends not to notice. I bought the house on Sycamore Lane because it was the only one I could afford after the divorce. A 2-story clapboard with peeling white paint, sagging gutters, and a wraparound porch that groaned like a dying thing. The realtor, a woman named Brenda with 2 red lipstick and eyes that never quite met mine, handed me the keys with a tight smile. "It's got character," she'd said, avoiding the water stain blooming across the living room ceiling like a bruise. "And the price? Well, let's just say the previous owner was eager to move on." She didn't mention why. I didn't ask. The mortgage was manageable. The silence after Sarah left was not. I needed walls. Any walls. Moving in was chaos. Boxes stacked to the ceilings. Dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light. The smell of mildew thick in the air. I started in the kitchen, unpacking mismatched plates, the cheap silverware set from the thrift store. I placed my favorite mug, chipped blue ceramic, a souvenir from a hiking trip with Sarah years ago, on the counter beside the sink. I turned to grab a box labeled pans from the hallway. The trip took maybe 15 seconds. When I turned back, the mug was gone. Not knocked over, not shattered on the floor, simply gone. Vanished. I checked under boxes, inside cabinets, even the trash can. Nothing. I chalked it up to exhaustion, stress, the blur of moving. I made a fresh pot of coffee in a different mug, the cheap plastic one, and tried to forget it. That night, the first skip happened. I was lying in the unfamiliar bed in the master bedroom, the mattress thin and lumpy beneath me. The house settled around me with pops and creaks, old timber contracting in the cool night air. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence where Sarah's breathing should have been. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come. Then, nothing. I opened my eyes. The room was the same, but the clock now read 3:49 a.m. 1 hour and 32 minutes gone, erased, like a film reel with frames cut out. My body felt stiff, as if I'd been lying perfectly still for hours, but my mind held no memory of those missing minutes. No dreams, no awareness. Just a smooth, seamless cut from 2:17 to 3:49. A cold sweat prickled my scalp. I sat up, heart pounding. I checked the window. The moon was in the same position, casting the same silver rectangle on the worn rug. No storm. No power outage that could explain a clock glitch. I shook the clock. The numbers stayed stubbornly at 3:49. I touched my own face. Cold. Real. The missing time felt like a phantom limb, a space where something vital should have been but wasn't. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the slow creep of dawn, jumping at every house groan, waiting for the seconds to vanish again. The next morning, over bitter coffee in the plastic mug, I mentioned it to Mrs. Gable, the elderly neighbor who'd brought over a welcome casserole. She lived next door in a pristine, lace-curtained bungalow. Her garden was immaculate, her white hair always neatly pinned. I found her weeding her roses, the scent thick and cloying in the warm air. "Mrs. Gable, strange thing happened last night. Woke up and over an hour it just disappeared. Clock jumped from 2:17 to almost 4 a.m. She didn't look up, her trowel digging methodically into the soft earth. Time plays tricks when you're alone in a new place, dear. Grief does that. Makes the hours stretch and snap like old elastic. She finally glanced at me, her pale blue eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You must be exhausted," That casserole has chicken. Good for the nerves." "It wasn't grief," I insisted, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "It was like a gap, a hole in time." She patted the soil around a rose bush with finality. "This old neighborhood has its quirks. Houses breathe. Pipes knock. Clocks get temperamental. Pay it no mind. Focus on unpacking. Makes a place feel like home." She turned back to her roses, effectively ending the conversation. Her dismissal was absolute. A wall. I felt foolish. Maybe she was right. Grief and stress. I was still raw. But the skips kept happening. Not just at night. I was hanging a picture in the hallway. A landscape print. Meaningless, but better than bare plaster. I hammered the nail. It went in crooked. I muttered a curse, set the hammer down on the floorboard beside me, and turned to grab the level from my toolbox 3 feet away. I turned back. The hammer was gone. The nail was perfectly straight. The picture hung centered on the wall. My hands were empty. My pulse hammered in my throat. I looked at my watch. 10:03 a.m. I was sure it had been 9:58 when I started. 5 minutes. Erased. The hammer sat neatly on the workbench across the room, where I hadn't placed it. I touched the picture frame, cold glass, real. The nail held firm. I backed away slowly, the hallway suddenly feeling too narrow, the wallpaper pattern swimming. Panic made me call my best friend Mark. He came over that evening, skeptical, but concerned. I poured us beers on the sagging porch, the setting sun painting the peeling paint in bloody hues. I told him everything. The missing mug, the vanished hour, the hammer, the 5 minutes lost. He listened quietly, swirling his beer. "Dude," he finally said, not unkindly, "you've been through hell, divorce, moving, this creepy-ass house. Your brain's on overload. Sleep deprivation does wild things. Time distortion is totally documented. It's not supernatural. It's neuroscience." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Get some proper sleep. Maybe see a doc about the stress. This place—" He glanced at the dark windows of the house. "It's getting to you. Needs new paint, for starters." I wanted to believe him, desperately. But later, as we'd stood in the kitchen grabbing more beers, it happened again. Mark was mid-sentence. "And Brenda said the roof was new last year, but it looks pretty rotted to me." He reached for the fridge handle. I saw his hand close on the cold metal. Then, nothing. I blinked. Mark was already walking out of the kitchen, 2 beers in hand, continuing his sentence as if there'd been no break. "So, I'd get it checked before winter." He handed me a beer. "You okay? You zoned out for a sec." "Mark," I said, my voice low and urgent, "what were you saying before you opened the fridge?" He frowned. "Huh? I was saying the roof looks rotted. Why?" "You were talking about Brenda and the roof. You reached for the handle, and then you were just walking away with the beers like a jump cut." He laughed, but it was strained. "Whoa, heavy. No, man. I opened it, grabbed the beers, turned around. You must have spaced out. Seriously, you look pale. Maybe sit down." I didn't sit down. I watched him, watched the room, watched the clock on the stove. 7:14 p.m. We moved to the living room. Mark kept talking, trying to lighten the mood, but his eyes kept flicking to me with concern. I felt the tension coil in my gut. The house felt watchful. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper. I focused on the grandfather clock in the hallway. A hulking, dark wood thing I hadn't even unpacked yet, still draped in a dusty sheet. Its pendulum was motionless. Mark paused mid-sentence about his new job. "You're not listening. You're staring at that sheet." "I'm waiting," I whispered. "For what?" "For it to skip." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I get it. You're freaked, but this isn't healthy. You need—" His voice cut off. Not abruptly, it just stopped. Like a tape recorder clicking off. Mark was frozen. His hand was raised, gesturing. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes were fixed on a point just over my shoulder, unblinking, utterly still. Not sleeping, not breathing. Frozen. I shot to my feet. "Mark! Mark!" I waved a hand in front of his face. No reaction. His skin felt cool to the touch. I checked his wrist. No pulse. Panic seized me. I shook him. "Mark!" Nothing. I ran to the window, yanking back the curtain. Dusk was deepening. Mrs. Gable was on her porch next door, watering her geraniums. I banged on the window. "Help! Call 911. My friend is collapsed." She looked up, her watering can pausing. She saw me, wild-eyed, and gave a small placid wave, smiled, turned back to her flowers, ignored me completely. I screamed her name until my throat was raw. She didn't turn. It was like I was behind soundproof glass. I ran back to Mark, still frozen. The grandfather clock in the hallway, its sheet was gone. The clock stood exposed. The pendulum wasn't swinging, but the hands were spinning, blurring. Round and round, the face like a demented carousel, tick, 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 accelerating into a high-pitched whine. The air vibrated. Dust motes hung suspended in the beams of fading light. The house groaned, a deep, resonant sound from its bones. Then silence. The hands stopped. 8:02 p.m. The pendulum gave one slow, heavy tock. Mark gasped. He stumbled back, dropping his beer bottle. It shattered on the floor. "Jesus, what the hell?" He looked around wildly, rubbing his chest. I felt dizzy, like I blacked out for a second. "Are you okay?" "You look like you saw a ghost." He didn't remember being frozen, didn't remember the spinning clock. He saw the broken glass, my terrified face, and assumed I'd had another episode. He left soon after, making excuses about an early start tomorrow, his concern now edged with something else. Fear, not of a house. Of me. The truth settled over me like cold ash. It wasn't just me. The house stole time, and everyone around me, Mrs. Gable, Mark, Brenda the realtor, they all knew. They just pretended not to, for their own peace of mind, or because acknowledging it gave it power. The house demanded silence. It fed on the unspoken. The skips became more frequent, more invasive. I'd be washing a plate, soap suds on my hands, and suddenly I'd be standing in the living room holding a book I hadn't picked up. The plate clean and dry in the drainer. An hour vanished. I'd wake up on a couch fully clothed, the TV static hissing, no memory of falling asleep, the clock showing 5:17 a.m. Once, I was standing in the shower, water hot on my back, when the world glitched. I was suddenly sitting at the kitchen table in dry pajamas, a cold cup of tea in front of me, the digital clock reading 4:44 a.m. The steam from the shower still clung to my skin. The smell of shampoo was in my hair, but the bathroom was dry, silent. The shower hadn't been running. I started documenting it, a notebook on the kitchen counter. I'd write the exact time before I did something mundane. 9:03 a.m., making coffee. Then, after the skip, I'd write what I found. 9:18 a.m., coffee made, mug full, stove cold, no memory of pouring it. The gaps grew longer, 10 minutes, 20, an hour. The entries became frantic scribbles. 3:17 p.m., opening front door to take out trash, skip. 4:02 p.m., standing in backyard. Trash can is full, garbage bag is tied, hands are dirty. No memory of walking outside. 11:49 p.m., reading in bed. Skip. 1:33 a.m., standing in a hallway, light on. Door to basement is open. Basement is dark. Door was closed and locked before. The basement door. It was always locked. A heavy bolt I'd installed after finding the original lock broken. I never went down there. The realtor had been vague about it. Storage space, damp. Best left alone. But after that skip, the bolt was undone. The door stood ajar, revealing only impenetrable blackness and the smell of wet earth. I didn't go down. I slammed the door shut, threw the bolt, and dragged a heavy chest of drawers in front of it. My hands shook. Mrs. Gable noticed the chest. She came over the next day with a just-baked loaf of banana bread, her smile too wide, too fixed. "Everything all right, dear? That's quite the barricade." She nodded at the chest blocking the basement door. "The lock's broken," I said flatly, not taking the bread. "And the skips, they're getting worse. Longer. I saw Mark freeze. The clock spun. You saw me banging on the window. You saw." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened like chips of ice. She set the bread down on the counter with precise care. "You need rest, real rest. This house, it's old. It holds on to things, sad things, angry things. It echoes, but it doesn't take anything. Time is precious, dear. Don't let your grief steal it from you." She patted my arm. Her hand was cold. "Eat the bread. It's good for you." She left without another word. The bread sat on the counter. I threw it away. It smelled faintly of dust and something sweetly rotten. The final skip happened on a Tuesday. Rain lashed the windows, turning the world gray and blurred. I was in the kitchen, trying to make soup, chopping vegetables. The rhythmic thwack of the knife on the cutting board was soothing. 2:17 p.m. I remember thinking how the rain sounded like static. I lifted the knife for another chop. Silence, not the absence of sound. A thick silence, heavy, pressed down, like diving deep underwater. I was no longer in the kitchen. I stood on the porch. The rain had stopped. The sky was a clear, hard blue. Late afternoon sun warmed the peeling paint of the railing. It was silent, not peaceful. Empty. No birds, no distant traffic, no wind in the leaves of the ancient sycamore tree at the edge of the yard. Just absolute, watchful stillness. The air smelled clean, sharp, wrong. I turned. The house looked different. The peeling paint was fresh. The sagging porch didn't sag. The windows gleamed. It looked lived in, loved, happy. But the silence was suffocating. I walked down the porch steps. The grass was neatly trimmed. Mrs. Gable's garden next door was overgrown weeds and dead flowers. Her white picket fence was broken in one section. Her bungalow looked abandoned, windows dark, paint peeling worse than mine ever did. I walked to the sidewalk. The street was empty. No cars, no people. Mailboxes stood crookedly. One lay on its side. A child's red tricycle lay abandoned on a lawn, half buried in tall grass. The world was frozen in a moment of abrupt abandonment. And a silence? It hummed, a low, almost subsonic vibration in the bones of earth. In my bones? I looked back at my house, my new house. The front door stood open. Warm golden light spilled out onto the porch. The smell of baking bread, real bread, yeasty and warm, drifted to me. Laughter, soft, muffled laughter from inside. A woman's voice, warm and familiar, singing off-key. Sarah's voice. My breath caught. Hope, sharp and painful, lanced through me. I took a step towards the door. then another. The laughter swelled. I could almost see her in the doorway. The golden light beckoned. All the loneliness, the grief, the fractured time. It could end. I could step back into the life that was stolen. I reached the bottom step. The humming silence deepened. The golden light from the doorway flickered. For a fraction of a second, it wasn't warm light. It was the sickly yellow glow of a bare bulb in a damp basement. The laughter turned brittle, high-pitched. Not Sarah's voice. Something mimicking it. Something hollow. I stopped. My foot hovered over the bottom step. The open door wasn't an invitation. It was a maw. The house wasn't giving back time. It was offering to replace it, to replace Mima, to fill the gaps it carved with something wearing my skin, humming a stolen song, living a stolen life in the stolen moments. The laughter cut off abruptly. The golden light winked out. The house stood dark and silent again, just an empty shell under the too bright sun. The silence pressed in, heavier than before, waiting. I didn't go inside. I turned and walked down the empty street, past Mrs. Gable's overgrown lot, past houses with dark windows and unmown lawns. I walked until my legs ached. The sun didn't move. The sky stayed that hard, empty blue. The silence didn't break. There were no skips here, only the endless humming now. When I finally turned back, exhausted, the street was different. Rain fell heavily, just as it had when I chopped the vegetables. My house looked old again, peeling paint, sagging porch. The front door was closed, locked. I let myself in. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it, knife in my hand, carrot half chopped on the board, steam rising from the pot on the stove. The digital clock on the microwave read 2:18 p.m., 1 minute. That's all the house gave me back. 1 minute stolen from a frozen afternoon that never was. I put the knife down, washed my hands slowly. The water from the tap was cold, real. I made the soup, ate it alone at the small kitchen table. The silence of the house was different now, not watchful. Satisfied. The skips didn't happen that night or the next. The house had taken what it needed, a taste, a promise. Mrs. Gable came by the following morning. Her garden was immaculate again, her bungalow pristine. Her smile was warm, genuine. "Slept well, dear? You look better." She didn't ask about the chest blocking the basement door. It was gone. I hadn't moved it. The bolt on the basement door was intact, locked tight. I didn't tell her about the frozen street, the golden light, the stolen laughter. I just smiled back. "Yes," I said, my voice calm. "I slept fine." She patted my arm. "Good. This house, it just needs someone to care for it, to belong here." She left, humming a little tune I didn't recognize. I stood on the porch, watching her walk back to her perfect garden. The sycamore tree rustled in a breeze I couldn't feel. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, something old, waiting. I looked at my watch. 10:03 a.m. I closed my eyes, felt the familiar tug, the smooth, seamless cut. Not fear this time. Resignation, acceptance. The house needed its rhythms, its pauses, its stolen breaths. When I opened my eyes, the watch read 10:17 a.m. 14 minutes gone, erased. I didn't check the kitchen. I didn't need to. I knew the soup pot would be clean on the stove. The carrot would be diced. The house would be warm, quiet, mine. I walked inside, closed the door softly behind me. The silence welcomed me. The silence was me. I am learning to skip. This story has come to an end. Let's start the next. The stars outside my window form words only I can read. It started the night Sarah left, not with a bang, but with a sigh that echoed in the hollow of our bedroom long after her suitcase wheels had vanished down the hall. I stood at the window, watching the taillights of her car bleed into the city's sodium vapor haze. The divorce papers crumpled in my fist like a dead bird. The sky was unusually clear for October, a vast black velvet expanse pricked with cold, indifferent stars. I remember thinking how absurd it was that the universe could be so vast, so ancient, and yet offer no solace for the tiny, shattered thing in my chest. Then, as I turned away, a flicker caught my eye. Not a shooting star, not a plane, a cluster of stars in the constellation Cassiopeia, 5 bright points, shifted, not in position, in alignment. They snapped into a new configuration, sharp and deliberate as Morse code, and the pattern they formed wasn't celestial. It was letters. She's gone. You're alone. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, stared harder. The words dissolved back into Cassiopeia's familiar W shape. My breath fogged cold glass. Stress, I told myself. Grief playing tricks on a sleep-deprived mind. I drew the curtains. But the next night, after another shift, drowning in spreadsheets at the data entry warehouse, I stood at the same window. The stars were brighter, sharper. Orion's belt, 3 stars in a line, stretched, pulled taut, and reformed into a single, stark word. Why? It wasn't a question the stars were asking. It was the one screaming inside my own skull, the one I hadn't dared voice to Sarah, to my therapist, to the empty whiskey bottle on the nightstand. Why did you leave? Why wasn't I enough? Why does everything break? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, back against the window seat, watching the sky. At 3:17 a.m., Sirius, the dog star, detached from Canis Major. It drifted across the black canvas, leaving a phosphorescent trail and aligned with Procyon and Castor to spell empty. Then Betelgeuse in Orion pulsed violently, its red light deepening to blood, and the word hollow burned across the eastern sky. I wasn't imagining it. The words were there, crisp, undeniable, written in starlight only I could decipher. I started documenting it. A notebook on the windowsill. I'd note the time, the constellation involved. The word formed. Oct, 14:11:03 p.m. Ursa Major, forgotten. Octa 17, 2:48 a.m. Lyra, guilt. Octa 22, 1:17 a.m. Scorpius, tail stars curved to form Lily. Lily, the name of the daughter Sarah and I lost, the silent miscarriage at 20 weeks that we never spoke of, never mourned, never even truly acknowledged. The hollow space we both carefully avoided, like a landmine in the room. The stars had found it. I tried to ignore them, drew the curtains tight, slept with my back to the window, but the words seeped through the fabric. I'd wake at 3:17 a.m. to the faint, ghostly afterimage of lonely burned into my retinas. The scent of Sarah's lavender shampoo would cling to the air, sharp and sweet, though she'd been gone for months. Once, opening the fridge for milk, I saw the words, remember, etched in frost on the freezer door, written in a constellation I didn't recognize. Stars too bright, too close together, pulsing with a sickly green light. I called my sister Maya. Over video chat, I showed her my notebook, my voice trembling. The stars, they're talking to me about Sarah, about Lily, about everything I've buried. She listened quietly, her face pale on the screen. Liv, this sounds like complicated grief. Or maybe sleep deprivation psychosis. You've been under so much stress. She leaned closer. Have you slept more than 4 hours a night since she left? It's not psychosis, I insisted. The words are real. They're in the sky. Look! I held my phone up to the window. The night was clear. Orion hung bright. See? Right there. Why? Maya squinted at her screen. Liv, I just see stars, normal stars, in a normal constellation. Her voice softened with pity. You need help, real help, a therapist who specializes in trauma. Her disbelief was a physical blow. If she couldn't see it, did it exist? Was I truly losing my mind? The breaking point came on November 3rd, the night of the Leonid meteor shower. The sky was supposed to be spectacular. I stood on my tiny, rickety fire escape. The city lights dimmed for the event. The air crisp and cold. Meteors streaked across the heavens. Brief, beautiful scratches of light. But between them, the fixed stars rearranged with terrifying speed. Cassiopeia blazed. She never loved you. Orion's sword spelled failure. The Big Dipper poured worthless. Like water from its bowl, then the meteors themselves changed. Instead of random streaks, they fell in deliberate patterns. One meteor traced the outline of Sarah's face in the sky, her eyes wide with accusation. Another etched the tiny, perfect curve of a fetus, Lily, before vanishing. A third meteor, brighter than the rest, streaked directly overhead and exploded into 1,000,000 fragments that reformed into a single, searing word that filled half the sky. Abandoned. Not by Sarah, by me. The word wasn't just in the sky. It vibrated in my bones. It echoed in the hollow space where my heart used to be. It was the truth I'd been running from since Lily's silent death, since Sarah's quiet departure, since my father walked out when I was 10. I was the constant, the one left behind, the void others escaped. I sank to my knees on the cold metal grating, tears freezing on my cheeks. The word abandoned pulsed in the sky, brighter, hotter, as if the stars themselves were feeding on my despair. Then a new light, not a star, not a meteor, a single, impossibly bright point of light detached from the chaos. It wasn't white. It was a soft, warm gold, like candlelight. It drifted slowly downward, not falling, but floating, until it hovered just beyond the fire escape railing. It was the size of a large coin, radiating a gentle warmth that cut through the November chill. From within the golden light, a voice spoke, not in my ears, in my mind, soft, familiar, the voice of my mother, who died when I was 7, from a cancer that moved too fast for goodbyes. Look closer, Liv. I did. The golden light wasn't a star. It was a memory, a single, preserved moment. Inside its glow, I saw myself at 7, sitting on the hospital bed, holding my mother's hand. She was frail, her skin papery, but her eyes were bright. She pressed a small, smooth river stone into my palm. Hold on to this, little sparrow, she'd whispered, her voice thin but clear. When the world feels too big and loud, hold this stone, feel its weight. Remember, you are real, you are loved, you are here. The golden light pulsed. The word abandoned in the sky flickered. The stars don't speak your pain, my mother's voice murmured. They mirror it. They show you the words you've carved into your own bones. But you are not those words. You are the hand that holds the stone. The golden light drifted closer. It wasn't a memory. It was a choice. A thread of real, living warmth in the cold tapestry of my despair. I reached out. My fingers passed through the light. It didn't burn. It soothed. like warm water on cracked skin. As my hand touched it, the word abandoned shattered, not into darkness, into 1,000 points of softer light, scattering like dandelion seeds on the wind. The other words dissolved, too. Worthless. Failure. Empty. They didn't vanish. They transformed. Cassiopeia reformed, not into an accusation, but a question. Who are you? Orion's belt became breathe. The Big Dipper poured here. The golden light settled into my palm, warm and solid. When I opened my hand, it wasn't a light anymore. It was the river stone my mother had given me, smooth, cold, real. I'd lost it years ago, buried in a box of childhood things after Sarah moved out. But here it was, in my hand. I clutched it tightly, felt its unchanging weight, its solid reality. I looked up at the sky. The stars were just stars again, distant, beautiful, silent. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. I didn't go back inside that night. I sat on the fire escape until dawn, the river stone clenched in my fist, watching the city lights fade as the true stars winked out. The words were gone, but the lesson remained. The stars don't lie. They reflect. They showed me the hollow because I refused to look at it. They spoke the words I'd buried because I was too afraid to say them aloud. They forced me to the edge of abandoned so I could choose the stone. Now I keep the river stone on my windowsill. On clear nights, I sit with it in my palm, watching the sky. The stars still rearrange sometimes, but the words are different now. Oct 30, 12:01 a.m., Draco, try. Nov 12, 3:17 Aum, Pegasus, breathe. Deck 1, 11:44 p.m., Andromeda, again. They're not accusations, they're invitations, gentle reminders from a universe that isn't indifferent, but waiting. Last night, during a rare break in the winter clouds, I saw a new word. Formed by the faint stars of the Southern Cross, usually invisible from my latitude, they blazed with impossible clarity, spelling a single word in warm gold light. Hope. I smiled, touched the river stone on the sill, felt its solid grounding weight. The stars remember my pain, but they also remember the stone, and so do I. This is where the story ends. Let's continue with the next. I received text messages from someone who died last month. The first message came on a Tuesday. Rain lashed the windows of my studio apartment, turning the city lights into smears of color on the wet glass. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A soft, familiar chime I hadn't heard in 32 days. My heart stopped. I knew that chime. It was his chime, the one I'd set for only one person. I didn't want to look. I knew it was a glitch, a cruel coincidence, a spam bot using a recycled number, but my hand moved anyway, trembling. The screen glowed. Unknown number. Liv! The rain sounds like static on the wires. Do you hear it too? My breath hitched. Only Daniel called me Liv, and only Daniel would describe rain like that, like the hiss of dead air on a disconnected phone line. He'd said it 100 times, lying beside me in bed, listening to storms roll in over the city. I typed, fingers numb. Who is this? The reply was instant, as if waiting. Unknown number. You left the bathroom window open again. The damp gets into the plaster. I can smell it from here. I had left it open, just a crack, for the musty smell. No one knew. No one could know. Daniel was dead, buried in Oak Hill Cemetery under a simple headstone that read, Daniel Reyes, 1988, 20 Donkenhof of all. I've been there yesterday, placing fresh lilies on the wet earth. I dropped the phone like it was burning. It clattered to the floor, screen still lit. The messages kept coming. Unknown number. The radiator's leaking under the sink. You'll find the bucket too late. Unknown number. You're wearing my old band t-shirt, the one with the torn sleeve. It smells like your shampoo now, not mine. Unknown number. Don't eat the takeout. The noodles are overcooked, just like that time in Chinatown. I'd ordered lo mein an hour ago. It sat untouched on the counter. I'd already noticed the noodles were mushy. Panic clawed up my throat. I called the number. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice answered. Not a recording, not a stranger. His voice, rough from sleep, warm with that familiar lisp on the S sounds. Liv? I couldn't speak. Tears blurred my vision. Hey, he murmured, the sound crackling slightly like a connection through static. You okay? You sound far away. You're dead, I whispered, the words raw. A pause, then softly. Am I? The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, phone clutched in my lap, every lamp blazing. The rain kept falling. The radiator did leak under the sink. A slow drip I'd missed until dawn. I found the bucket just as the water pooled on the linoleum. The messages stopped for 3 days. I almost convinced myself it was a stress-induced hallucination. Grief playing tricks. Then on Friday night, as I walked home from the laundromat, phone tucked in my pocket, it buzzed again. Unknown number. Turn left at Elm. No, not right. The man in the gray coat is waiting by your building. He has bad eyes. He watches. I froze mid-step. Elm Street was 2 blocks ahead. My usual route was straight home, right on Sycamore. I'd never turned left on Elm after dark. I peered down Elm. Under a flickering street lamp, a man in a long gray coat stood motionless, collar turned up against the drizzle. His face was in shadow, but I felt his gaze like a physical weight. I took Sycamore. Right. As I neared my building, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Good. He's still there, watching the empty door. He doesn't know you're not home yet. I ran the last block, fumbling with my keys, heart hammering. The next messages were intimate, horrifyingly intimate. Unknown number. You're thinking about the lake, age 12. The minnows biting your toes, the smell of wet pine. You never told anyone you almost drowned that day. You kept it secret, like you keep everything secret. I had almost drowned. A summer storm had rolled in, churning the water. I'd panicked, swallowed mouthfuls of lake water. Daniel wasn't there. No one was. I dragged myself onto the muddy bank, coughing, shaking, too ashamed to tell anyone, not my parents, not my friends, not even Daniel. Unknown number. You touched a scar on your wrist when you're anxious, the one from the broken bottle. You think no one notices. I notice. I look down, my left wrist, the faint white lines from a childhood accident. I was touching them. The final message came at 3:17 a.m., the time he'd died, alone in his apartment, a week before anyone found him, a heart condition no one knew he had. Unknown number. I'm not in the ground, Liv. I'm in the static, in the gaps between the rings, in the spaces where you forget to check. Come to the apartment. Bring the key. I left the door unlocked. His apartment, 4B. I hadn't been back since the funeral. The landlord had packed his things into boxes. The place was empty, cold. But I went. Rain soaked through my coat as I stood before 4B. The door was unlocked. Swinging slightly in the draft from the hallway, Inside, the smell hit me first. Dust, mildew, and beneath it, the faint, lingering scent of his cologne. Sandalwood and something sharp. The apartment was stripped bare. No furniture, no boxes, just empty rooms and peeling wallpaper. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long, lonely shadows. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. Bedroom. I walked down the hall. The bedroom door stood open. Inside, nothing. Just bare floorboards and a single window. Then I saw it on the windowsill, a small, tarnished silver locket. My locket. I'd lost it months ago. A cheap trinket from a street fair. I'd searched everywhere. I picked it up. It was cold, heavy. I pried it open. Inside wasn't a photo. A tiny slip of paper, folded. Unfolding it, I saw his handwriting, neat, precise, the way he wrote grocery lists. Liv, if you're reading this, the static is strong. I didn't die in my sleep. The man in the gray coat, he's real. He watches the lonely ones. He waits for the spaces between heartbeats. He was in the apartment that night. I saw him in the reflection of the TV screen just before it happened. He doesn't take lives. He takes the echoes, the spaces where love lived. He's watching you now from the alley. Don't turn around. Keep the locket. It's iron. It bites. I froze. The rain outside seemed to hush. The only sound was my own pulse roaring in my ears. From the alley below, a soft tap, tap, tap began, like fingernails on glass. I didn't turn. I clutched the locket, the metal biting into my palm. My phone buzzed again. A final message. Unknown number. He can't cross iron or salt or the memory of being loved. Lock the door, Liv. I'll keep watch from the wires. I backed out of the bedroom, locked the apartment door, leaned against it, trembling. The locket clenched at my fist. The tapping stopped. The rain returned. I never saw the man in the gray coat again. But I keep the locket on a chain around my neck now, iron, cold against my skin, and every night, before I sleep, I scatter a line of salt across my windowsill. The messages don't come as often, just when the static is strong, when the world feels thin. Last week, a single line appeared. Unknown number. The lilies at the graveside are wilting. I see them. They're beautiful. I didn't reply. I just touched the locket, felt its solid, unyielding weight. He's not in the ground. He's in the silence between the chimes. And I'm learning to listen. And that is the end of this story. Now let's begin a new one. Reality around me flickers like a broken screen when I'm alone. I moved into apartment 3B because the rent was $425 a month, utilities included. The listing photo showed sunlit hardwood floors and a kitchen with stainless steel appliances. What I got was peeling linoleum, walls the color of dried mustard, and a refrigerator that hummed like a dying beehive. Mr. Henderson, the landlord, handed me the keys in the dim lobby of the Elm Street building, his eyes darting to the flickering fluorescent light above us. "Quiet building," he muttered, not meeting my gaze. "Just keep the lights on after dark. It saves on the electricity." He didn't explain why. I didn't ask. After the layoff and the eviction, I'd take moldy walls over sleeping in my car. The first flicker happened 3 nights later. I was microwaving frozen dumplings, the only light coming from the oven's glow. The room was silent except for the rhythmic beep, 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 counting down the seconds. Then a stutter. The microwave light dimmed. The beep, beep, beep skipped like a scratched CD. The air thickened, smelling faintly of ozone and wet concrete. For half a second, the kitchen wasn't mine. The linoleum was gone. In its place stretched a narrow corridor of cracked tile, walls lined with rusted pipes that dripped black fluid. At the end of the corridor, a door stood ajar, revealing only deeper darkness. A low, grinding sound vibrated through my bones like stone dragging on stone. Then, snap! The microwave light blazed. Beep, beep, beep. The dumpling spun on the turntable. I stood frozen, spoon halfway to my mouth. The smell of pork and ginger filled the air. Normal, but my hands were shaking. I checked the apartment door. Locked. Windows sealed. I told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, the cheap LED bulbs buzzing in the ceiling. It happened again the next afternoon. I was sorting laundry in the bedroom, folding a T-shirt. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting warm stripes on the carpet. I lifted the shirt. The light flickered, not the bulb, the sunlight. It fractured into jagged shards of static, like a TV losing signal. The stripes on the carpet dissolved into a grid of pixelated gray. The grinding sound returned deeper this time, accompanied by a wet, clicking rhythm. Click, thud, click, thud. Like something heavy dragging itself across a floor, the bedroom walls bled away. I stood in a vast, empty space. Concrete floor, no windows, no doors, just endless gray walls stretching into shadow. High above, a single industrial light flickered erratically, casting strobing shadows that didn't match my movements. In one of those shadows, something moved, not a shape, a tear, a vertical rip in the air shimmering like heat haze, revealing only deeper static beyond. From the tear came a whisper, not in my ears, but inside my skull. Almost sinks, almost holds. I dropped the T-shirt. The static collapsed. Sunlight flooded back. The click-thud faded to the drip of the bathroom faucet. I ran to the window. Elm Street was unchanged. Cars passed. People walked dogs. Normal. But the smell of wet concrete clung to my skin. I started documenting it. My phone's notes app became a log of glitches. Oak-Test 12, 2:17 p.m., living room, light from window pixelated, heard grinding, smelled ozone, felt cold spot near radiator. Octay 14, 11:03 p.m., bathroom mirror flickered during toothbrushing, reflection showed cracked tiles behind me. No mirror in reflection, just darkness. Octa 17, 8:44 a.m., coffee maker display glitched, showed error, reality corrupted, reset after 10 seconds. I showed the notes to Maya, my sister, over coffee at her tidy suburban kitchen. She skimmed the list, her brow furrowed. Liv, this sounds like sleep paralysis, or maybe migraines. You've been under so much stress. She pushed the sugar bowl toward me. Have you slept more than 4 hours a night since the layoff? It's not sleep, I insisted, my voice tight. It's when I'm wide awake, alone. The air shudders, like the world is buffering. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You need to see someone, a therapist or a neurologist. This isn't healthy. Healthy? I laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Maya, yesterday I put my keys on the counter. When I turned back, they were on the floor, not dropped. Placed, exactly where the static showed a drain grate in that concrete room. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Grief does strange things. After Dad died, I kept hearing his whistle in the shower, for months. She changed the subject, asking about my job search. I stopped talking about the flickers. Mr. Henderson came by to fix the dripping faucet. I mentioned the weird light fluctuations. He didn't look up from his wrench. "This building's old wiring," he grunted. "Voltage spikes. Happens in the 70s. Builds. Keep a lamp on in every room. Steady current helps." He tightened a bolt. The dripping stopped. "And don't go into the basement. Leaky pipes. Structural issues." He left without taking payment. As he descended the stairs, the hallway light above him flickered violently. For 3 seconds it wasn't Henderson walking down the steps. It was a tall, emaciated figure in a stained maintenance uniform, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its eyes were voids. It didn't blink. When the light steadied, Henderson was gone. The stairwell was empty. I locked my apartment door and wedged a chair under the knob. The flickers grew longer, more invasive. One Tuesday washing dishes, the kitchen dissolved. Not static this time, a seamless cut. I stood in that concrete room again. The industrial light flickered overhead. The click-thud was louder, closer. From the shadows near the tear in the air, a shape emerged, hunched, quadrupedal. Its skin was the color of old dishwater, stretched taut over too many joints. It had no eyes, only smooth, featureless flesh where a face should be. But it knew I was there. It turned its headless torso toward me. The click-thud was its movement. Metal claws, scraping concrete, a heavy, broken limb dragging behind it. It let out a wet, gurgling sound that vibrated in my molars. I stumbled back, hitting a wall that wasn't there a second before. My hand passed through it like mist. I fell backward and landed on my kitchen floor, soaked in soapy water, the faucet still running. The sink was full of dishes. No time had passed. The microwave clock read 3:17 p.m., exactly when it always happened. I called in sick to the temp agency. I bought every light bulb the hardware store carried. I plugged in lamps until the apartment glowed like a surgical theater. I played music constantly, talk radio, podcasts, white noise, anything to fill the silence. The flickers slowed. But at 3:17 a.m. every night, the lights dimmed. The music stuttered into static. The world pixelated at the edges, and in that static, the grinding grew louder. The click-thud echoed from the hallway, from the closet, from the space behind the refrigerator. I'd huddle on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a flashlight clutched in my hand, whispering, "Not real, not real, not real." But the smell of wet concrete was real. The vibration in the floorboards was real. The terror was real. Maya came over unannounced on a Saturday morning, concerned texts ignored. She found me sitting in the dark living room, all lamps unplugged. "Liv?" Her voice was sharp with worry. "What's going on?" I didn't look at her. I stared at the window. "They only come when the lights are low." "Who?" "The things in the static." My voice was flat, empty. "They're waiting for the signal to break, to stay broken." She knelt beside me, her perfume jasmine, expensive, cutting through the smell of dust and fear. "You need help, real help, not more lamps." I finally met her eyes. Hers were wide with tears. "They showed me Henderson," I whispered. "He's not Henderson. He's a patch, a bad repair. The real one, he went into the basement years ago during a flicker. They kept his shape, but it's wearing thin." She didn't argue, didn't call me crazy. She just hugged me, her arms tight around my shaking shoulders. "Let's get you somewhere safe, my place, just for tonight." Her apartment was modern, minimalist, no shadows in the corners, no flickering lights. We slept on her couch, a mountain of blankets between us. At 3:16 a.m., her digital clock glowed steadily. I closed my eyes. Just for a second, I opened them to static, not the concrete room. Her living room, but wrong? The white walls were streaked with gray digital noise. The floor tiles shifted like broken glass. Maya's perfect IKEA furniture bled pixels at the edges, and standing over her sleeping form, a shadow bent close. Not human, taller, thinner. Its outline blurred and reformed with every flicker of the static. It had too many limbs, too many fingers, long and needle-thin, hovering just above Maya's chest. Its face, if it had one, was a shifting mosaic of broken screen fragments. From its form came that same grinding whisper. Sync error, subject unstable, repair required. Maya didn't stir. She slept deeply, peacefully. The shadow thing's fingers dipped lower, toward her heart. I didn't scream. I lunged, grabbed the heavy ceramic lamp from the side table, swung it blindly. It passed through the shadow like smoke. The lamp crashed to the floor, shattering. Maya jolted awake. Live? What? The static vanished. The room was pristine. Moonlight streamed through the blinds. The lamp lay in pieces on the carpet. Maya stared at me, her face pale. You were sleepwalking. You must have knocked it over. I pointed at the space where the shadow had stood. It was here, watching you. It was going to... She cut me off, her voice gentle but firm. Liv, look at me. She took my shoulders. This isn't the apartment. This is my home, safe. There's nothing here but us. She led me to the guest room, locked the door from the outside. Rest. We'll talk in the morning. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, back against the door, listening. At 3:17 a.m., the lock clicked, not turned. Melted. The metal flowed like liquid mercury, reforming into a crude handle on the other side. The door swung open silently. The hallway beyond wasn't Maya's hallway. It was the concrete corridor from my flickers. Pipes dripped black fluid. The click, thud, echoed from the darkness. At the end of the hall, the door stood ajar. The tear in reality shimmered within it. The shadow thing stood in the threshold, its form stabilizing. Tall, hunched, metal claws scraping the floor. It turned its blank face toward me. No mouth, but the grinding whisper filled the small room. Subject rejected repair, corruption spreading, initiate purge. I ran, not down the hall, through the guest room window. I shattered the glass, tumbling into the rose bushes below Maya's balcony. Thorns tore my arms. I didn't feel them. I ran until my lungs burned, the city lights blurring through tears. I didn't stop until I reached Elm Street, until I stood before the familiar peeling door of apartment 3B. I didn't go inside. I sat on the top step of the building stoop, hugging my knees, waiting for dawn. The street lights flickered, cars passed, normal, but in the gaps between the flickers, in the half-second when the light dimmed, I saw them, shapes in the alleyways, in the reflections of car windows, hunched figures with too many joints, blank faces drinking in the shadows. They didn't approach. They just watched, waiting for the signal, waiting for the world to glitch. Mr. Henderson found me there at sunrise. He didn't seem surprised. He sat beside me on the cold concrete step, the smell of damp wool and motor oil clinging to him. "You saw the between," he said quietly. Not a question. "That's what the old tenants called it, the static place, where the signal phrase." He pulled a worn photograph from his coat pocket. A younger Henderson, smiling beside a woman with kind eyes, and a little girl with pigtails. My family. 20 years ago, we lived here in 3B until the flickers started. For my daughter first. She'd cry about the broken TV people in her closet. He traced the girl's face on the photo. One night, during a bad flicker, she walked into the static, just stepped through the wall like it wasn't there. We never got her back. My wife. She couldn't live with the not knowing. She left, took her own way out. He folded the photo carefully. The building remembers grief. It feeds on it. The flickers are weak spots, tears, and the things in the between, they're drawn to the tears. They want to mend the broken signal, but their idea of mending is to erase the corruption, to erase us. Why me? I whispered. You're hollow, he said simply. Layoff, eviction. The loneliness after the divorce, hollow spaces are easy to fill, easy to overwrite. He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. There's only one way to stop it, to keep the signal stable. How? You have to fill the hollow, not with things, not with people, with light, real light, unbroken light. They can't abide it. He nodded toward the rising sun. Dawn is good, but it's not enough. You need a beacon, something that holds no static, no corruption. He reached into his pocket and pressed something cold and smooth into my palm. An old film camera, a Minolta SRT 101. My father's. He was a press photographer, covered wars, disasters. He said light that captures truth has weight. It holds the world together. Load it with real film, not digital. Film remembers light the way bones remember blood. His eyes held a deep, ancient weariness. Take it and live. Don't develop the photos alone. I didn't go back to 3B. I rented a room above a laundromat in a different part of town. Cheap, bright. I bought a roll of Kodak Tri-X film, loaded the Minolta with shaking hands. Every time the world flickered, when the streetlight stuttered, when the bus engine skipped, I raised the camera. Click, click, click. The viewfinder showed static, tears, the grinding shapes, but the shutter clicked anyway. Solid, real. The flickers lessened. The click-thud faded to a memory. For 3 days, the world held steady. I developed the film at a 24-hour photo lab downtown, handing the clerk the sealed envelope. I'll wait, I said. He nodded, disappearing into the red-lit, dark room. When he returned, his face was pale. He didn't hand me the photos. He placed them face down on the counter. I don't know what kind of prank this is, he said, his voice tight. But those images, they're not right. The negatives are blank except for one frame, and that one, he wouldn't look at me. I suggest you forget you ever took them. I took the envelope, walked to a park bench under a weak afternoon sun, opened it with numb fingers. Most prints were pure black, blank. But the last one, it showed the concrete room, sharp, clear, no static. In the center stood the shadow thing, frozen mid-stride. Its form was detailed, metal claws, dripping joints, the blank face reflecting the industrial light. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, half hidden in the shadows near the tear, stood figures. Dozens of them, men, women, children. Their features were blurred, smudged like wet ink, but their postures were unmistakable. Resignation, defeat. Their bodies flickered at the edges, dissolving into static. They weren't prisoners. They were patches, failed repairs. Henderson's daughter was among them, her pigtails barely visible, one small hand reaching toward the tear as if still trying to get back. And in the foreground, kneeling near the shadow thing's clawed foot, was a figure in a familiar thrift store coat. Me. My face was turned toward the camera, mouth open in a silent scream. But my eyes were voids, smooth, featureless, like the thing's face. On the back of the photo, in handwriting that wasn't mine, jagged, mechanical, a note was scrawled, "Synchronization complete. Corruption purged. Welcome home. Live." I dropped the photo. It fluttered to the pavement like a dead leaf. The park sounds faded, the laughter of children, the rustle of leaves, the distant traffic. The air thickened, smelled of ozone, wet concrete. The light dimmed, not sunset. Glitch. The world fractured into jagged pixels. The grinding sound rose from the earth itself, from the shadows beneath the park benches, from the cracks in the sidewalk. The hunched shapes emerged. Dozens of them. Blank faces turned toward me, claws scraping concrete. The click-thud became a roar. I raised the Minolta. My hands didn't shake. I looked through the viewfinder, not at the shadow things, at the sun, low in the sky, golden, unbroken. I pressed a shutter. Click. The static shattered. Light exploded, not from the sun, but from the camera itself. A pure white radiance that burned away the pixels, the grinding, the stench of concrete. The shadow thing shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and dissolved into smoke. The park snapped back into focus. Children laughed on the swings. A dog chased a squirrel. Normal. But the Minolta was gone, melted in my hands. Only the lens remained, warm and smooth against my palm. I walked back to Elm Street as dusk fell. The building looked the same, peeling paint, flickering lobby light. I didn't go to 3B. I climbed the stairs to the roof. The city spread below me, lights blinking on as night deepened. I held the melted camera lens up to the first stars. It caught the glow of a passing plane, refracted it into a beam of pure, steady light that cut through the gathering dark. The flickers haven't stopped. Not really. At 3:17 a.m., when the streetlights dim, I feel the static hum in my bones. I smell the wet concrete. I hear the click-thud from the stairwell, but I stand on the roof. I hold the lens to the sky. I let the light, real light, unbroken light, pour through it. The beam cuts the darkness. The static recedes. The grinding fades. Henderson watches me sometimes from the alley below. He doesn't wave. He just nods, his face half in shadow, half in the lens light. I know what he sees, not just me. The hollow space beside me, the shape that flickers at the edge of the beam, waiting, patient. The light is holding, for now. But light needs fuel, and the hollow inside me, it's so very deep. Last night, as I stood on the roof, the beam faltered, just for a second. In that gap, the static rushed in. The city lights pixelated. The click-thud echoed from the fire escape. And from the darkness behind me, a voice, not grinding, not whispering, but my voice, calm and reasonable, said, "Let go, Liv. The light is heavy. The hollow is warm. We can mend you. We can make the flickering stop." I tightened my grip on the lens, felt its heat, thought of the park, the children's laughter, the dog chasing the squirrel, real things, warm things. I didn't turn around. I raised the lens higher. The beam steadied. But part of me, the small, starved part that remembers the warmth of Sarah's hand, the smell of my father's pipe tobacco, the sound of my own laughter before the world broke, part of me wants to drop the lens, to step into the static, to let the hollow be filled. The light is heavy, and the darkness is so very patient. I hold the beam steady. I wait for dawn. I listen for the click. And I wonder how long my hands will keep from shaking. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The Weeping Channel. I do not own a television anymore. I smashed mine with a heavy framing hammer 3 weeks ago. I won't look at a computer monitor if the room is dark. I won't even walk past the appliance section of a department store, and I threw my smartphone into the river yesterday. I'm writing this on a library computer in a room full of people with the sun shining through the windows. It is the only way I can type without shaking. Once I hit send on this post, I am leaving the city. I don't know where I'm going, but I know I can't stay here. It started because I was broke. I don't mean I can't afford to go out for drinks broke. I mean, I was eating dry ramen because I couldn't afford the gas bill to boil water. I was 24, fresh out of a useless degree program and drowning in debt. I had just moved into a basement apartment in the city to save money. Calling it an apartment is generous. It was a damp, subterranean concrete box. The windows were thin, horizontal slits near the ceiling that looked out onto the ankles of passing pedestrians. The whole place smelled permanently of wet concrete, old cabbage, and that metallic scent of copper pipes that leak behind the walls. I couldn't afford cable. Streaming services were a luxury of the past, and the Wi-Fi signal from the upstairs neighbor, which I was stealing, was spotty at best. It usually died completely whenever it rained, which was often. The silence in that basement was heavy. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a pressurized silence. It felt like the air was pushing against my eardrums, waiting for something to fill the void. Being underground messes with your head. You lose track of time. You feel the weight of the building above you. I needed noise. I needed distraction. I needed a voice in the room that wasn't my own internal monologue telling me what a failure I was. So, on a Tuesday afternoon, I went to a dusty thrift store on the corner of 4th and Elm. It was one of those places that smells like mothballs and other people's memories. I walked past the rows of stained shirts and chipped mugs to the electronics section in the back. There it was, an old CRT television. You know the kind, big, heavy, with a curved glass screen that gathers static electricity so you can feel it on the hair of your arms. It had a plastic casing that stuck out 2 feet in the back. It had a built-in VCR slot that looked like a hungry mouth and rabbit ear antennas wrapped in tin foil. It was ugly, it was heavy, it was perfect. "How much?" I asked the guy at the counter. He looked at it like it was a bag of trash. $8, he grunted. "No refunds. We don't know if it works." I paid cash. I lugged the monstrosity home, my arms straining under the awkward weight. I had to stop 3 times on the walk back just to catch my breath. By the time I got it down the narrow stairs to my basement, I was sweating and my back was screaming. I set it up on a plastic milk crate in what I generously called my living room. I plugged it in. I didn't have a cable box or a digital converter. I just wanted some white noise to sleep to. Maybe catch a ghostly signal of the local news, or a fuzzy rerun of a sitcom from the 90s. The first few nights were fine. I just got static. A snowstorm of black and white pixels, accompanied by that comforting shh hiss. If I stood on one leg and held the left antenna just right, I could get the audio from a Spanish soap opera though the picture was just wavy lines. But mostly, it was just the static. It was enough. It filled the room. It pushed back the silence. Then came the storm. It was a Tuesday night, exactly 1 week after I bought the TV. It was raining hard outside, a torrential downpour that turned the gutters into rivers. Water was trickling down the window well, making a steady drip, drip, drip sound that was driving me insane. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned on my mattress, the springs digging into my back. The air in the basement felt thick, charged with electricity. Finally, I gave up. I sat up, wrapped my blanket around my shoulders, and reached out to turn on the TV. I clicked the knob. Instead of the usual snowstorm of static, the screen turned blue. It wasn't a no-signal blue. It was a solid electric blue that seemed to hum with intensity. It illuminated the entire dark room with an eerie underwater glow. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and distort in the blue light. There was no sound, no hiss, no hum, just absolute silence. I smacked the side of the plastic casing hard. "Piece of junk," I muttered, tired and irritable. The blue flickered once, twice. Then an image cut in. It wasn't a broadcast. It was too stable, too sharp for an analog signal in a storm. And it wasn't a TV show. It was black and white, grainy. It looked like footage from an old security camera, but the angle was strange. It was low to the ground, maybe, knee-high, as if the camera had been placed on the floor. It showed a long, dark hallway. The floor was covered in black and white checkered tiles, like an old diner or a hospital from the 1950s. The walls were peeling, long strips of wallpaper hanging down like dead skin. The lighting was bad, flickering and dim, coming from some unseen source down the hall. At the far end of the hallway, deep in the center of the screen, there was a heavy wooden door. It was slightly ajar, spilling a sliver of darkness that seemed somehow darker than the rest of the hall. I stared at it. I waited for a title card, a commercial, anything. There was no sound at first. Then, slowly, a low humming started. It sounded like a choir humming a single discordant note. It was off-key. It vibrated in my chest. I watched, mesmerized, unable to look away. Nothing happened for a full minute. The image was static, save for the rolling grain of the film and the occasional flicker of the light in the hallway. Then the door at the end of the hallway moved. It didn't swing open fast. It crept. It inched open, the darkness widening. A hand reached out from the void. It was a small hand, a child's hand, pale and delicate. It reached around the doorframe and waved, not a frantic wave for help, a slow, deliberate greeting, like it knew I was watching. Then the screen cut to black. I sat there in the dark, staring at the dead glass curve of the screen. I felt cold, not the damp basement cold I was used to. This was a deep internal chill that started in my marrow and worked its way out. I reached out and turned the TV off. Then, for good measure, I reached behind it and unplugged the cord from the wall. I threw the cord onto the floor. Just a weird broadcast. I whispered to the empty room. Some art student project hijacking the signal, just a prank. I eventually fell asleep, but I dreamed of hallways, long, endless hallways with checkered floors. The next day, I went to work at the warehouse. I was a zombie. I dropped a pallet of boxes, and my manager yelled at me for 10 minutes. I barely heard him. All I could think about was that blue screen, that hand. When I got home that evening, the apartment felt colder than usual. I checked the thermostat. It was normal. I made dinner, canned soup, and tried to read a book. I told myself I wouldn't turn the TV on. I didn't need it. I would just read until I passed out. I sat on my mattress reading a paperback by the light of a single lamp. But as the hours ticked by, the silence grew heavier. It pressed in on me. I found myself reading the same sentence over and over again. My eyes kept darting to the TV sitting on the milk crate in the corner. It looked like a black eye staring at me. At around 2 LKM, I dozed off with the book on my chest. I woke up an hour later. The room was bathed in blue light. The TV was on. My heart stopped. I froze, not moving a muscle. I stared at the plug lying on the floor, clearly disconnected from the outlet. I could see the copper prongs gleaming in the blue light. It was 3 feet away from the wall. I looked back at the screen. It was glowing. This time, the image was clearer. The grain was finer. It was the same hallway, the same peeling wallpaper, the same checkered floor, the door at the end. But now the door was wide open. Standing in the doorway was a figure. It was small, maybe 4 feet tall. It was wearing what looked like a dirty, oversized hospital gown that hung loosely on its frame, stained with dark patches. Its feet were bare and gray, but it was the head that made my breath catch in my throat. Its head was completely covered in bandages. Thick white gauze wrapped around its entire skull, layer upon layer, covering its eyes, its nose, its mouth. No features were visible, just a blank, wrapped sphere of dirty cloth. The humming sound was louder now, and it had changed. It wasn't just humming anymore, it was weeping. Sob, gasp, sob. It sounded wet, gurgling, like someone crying through a mouthful of water or blood. The sound filled the room, coming from the mono speaker of the TV, but sounding like it was right next to my ear. "Hello?" I whispered. My voice trembled so bad it barely came out. I felt insane talking to a television set that wasn't plugged in. "Who are you?" The figure on the screen twitched. It took a step forward into the hallway. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a stop-motion puppet that was missing a few frames of animation. Then it raised a hand, the same small, pale hand I had seen the night before, and pointed. It didn't point at me. It pointed at the floor right in front of the camera lens. The camera angle shifted down smoothly, mechanically, as if someone was operating it. On the dusty, checkered floor, someone had written a word in the grime with their finger. The letters were shaky and jagged. Below. The screen cut to black. The blue light vanished, plunging me into darkness. I jumped out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I grabbed the TV cord and yanked it further away from the wall, throwing it across the room. I checked the back of the set. Maybe there were batteries, a backup power source, some kind of prank device installed inside. I grabbed a screwdriver from my kitchen drawer and frantically unscrewed the back casing. I ripped the plastic off. Inside, it was just dust, wires, and the glass tube. No batteries, no hidden computer, just old analog trash. I threw a heavy wool blanket over the TV, blocking out the dark screen. I turned on every light in the apartment, the bathroom light, the kitchen light, the floor lamp. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the corner of the room, clutching a kitchen knife, watching the blanket-covered shape. Every creak of the floorboards upstairs made me jump. Every drip of water from the pipes sounded like a footstep. The third night was the end. I worked a double shift at the warehouse just to avoid going home. I stayed until the manager kicked me out. I wandered the streets for an hour, drinking coffee, delaying the inevitable. But eventually, I had to go back. I had nowhere else to go. I got home at almost 3:00 a.m. I was exhausted, my body aching, my mind numb from lack of sleep. I unlocked the door, my hands shaking. I walked into the apartment, dropped my keys on the counter, and froze. The blanket I had thrown over the TV was on the floor in a heap. The TV was on, and the volume was all the way up. The sound was deafening. It hit me like a physical blow, screaming, high-pitched, distorted screaming that sounded like metal tearing or a fox dying in a trap. It filled the small concrete box of a room, bouncing off the walls, vibrating in my teeth. I dropped my bag and covered my ears, wincing in pain. I ran to the TV to smash it, to stop the noise, to kill it. The image on the screen stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a face, extreme close-up. It was the bandaged face. The camera was inches away from it. The gauze was stained brown and red, wet and glistening around where the mouth should be. The texture of the fabric was so clear I could see the individual threads and the dirt trapped between them. As my hand hovered over the power button, the screaming stopped. Instantly. Absolute silence. The transition was so abrupt it made my ears ring. The figure on the screen tilted its head to the side, a bird-like, twitchy movement. Then the bandages around the mouth area began to split. They tore open with a wet, raw-rip sound. Underneath the bandages, there were no lips. The mouth was sewn shut. Thick black thread crisscrossed the pale skin, pulling it tight. The skin around the stitches was red and angry. The stitches strained as the jaw tried to open. A voice came out of the TV speakers. It wasn't the screaming anymore. It was a whisper, a raspy, dry whisper that sounded like dead leaves skittering on pavement. Here. I yanked the cord again, terrified, sobbing now. Nothing happened. The TV stayed on. The face stared at me. I grabbed the remote, which I hadn't even put batteries in, and smashed the power button repeatedly. Nothing. It is here, the voice whispered again, more urgent this time. The stitches on the screen began to bleed. Then I heard a sound from behind me. Creak! It came from the floor vent. The large metal heating grate in the corner of the room near the closet. It was the main intake for the building's furnace. I turned around slowly, dread pooling in my stomach like lead. The metal screw holding the grate in place popped out. It flew across the room and pinged against the opposite wall. The heavy metal grate lifted up, pushed from the inside. I watched in horror as long, pale fingers wrapped around the edge of the vent. It wasn't a child's hand. These fingers were impossibly long, skeletal, and gray. The nails were black, cracked, and curled like talons. A head pushed up through the opening. It was wrapped in bandages, dirty, brown-stained bandages. I screamed and backed away, tripping over the milk crate the TV sat on. The crate collapsed, sending the TV tumbling. It hit the floor with a crash, but the screen didn't break. It landed face up, the image of the sewn mouth still staring at the ceiling, glowing blue. The thing crawled out of the vent. It moved like a spider, limbs splayed out at wrong angles, joints popping and cracking with every movement. It pulled itself onto the concrete floor, wearing that same filthy hospital gown I had seen on the screen. It stood up. It was small, hunched over. It crawled toward me on its hands and knees. I scrambled backward, crab walking on my hands and feet until my back hit the cold concrete wall. I had nowhere to go. "What do you want?" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "Leave me alone, please." The thing stopped halfway across the room. It sat up on its knees. It looked at me with its bandaged face. It didn't attack. It didn't lunge. It raised a hand and pointed. It pointed at the TV lying on the floor. I looked at the screen. The image had changed. It was no longer the close-up of the face. It was my apartment. It was a live feed of my living room, shot from a high angle from the corner of the ceiling where the shadows were deepest. The picture was crisp and clear. I could see myself cowering against the wall, looking pathetic and small. I could see the bandaged monster kneeling in the center of the room, pointing. But on the screen, there was something else. Standing directly behind me, in the shadow of the doorway to the kitchen, was a tall, dark figure. It was a shadow person, a silhouette of pure vantablack darkness, 7 feet tall, its edges blurring into smoke. It had no features, no face, except for 2 points of burning red light where its eyes should be. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. It smelled of sulfur, ozone, and rotten meat. I didn't turn around. Every instinct in my body screamed that if I turned around, if I looked it in the eyes, I would die. The bandaged thing on the floor wasn't attacking me. It was warning me. "Run!" the bandaged thing hissed. The stitches on its sewn mouth tore open one by one. Pop, pop, pop. Blood dribbled down its chin onto the dirty gown. "Run!" I lunged to the side. I rolled away from the wall just as a massive black claw slashed the air where my head had been a second before. The claw gouged deep grooves into the drywall, sending white dust flying. I scrambled to my feet, slipping on the loose paper scattered on the floor. I sprinted for the door. The apartment shook. A low, guttural roar filled the room. It sounded like the earth splitting open. The lights flickered and exploded, showering the room in glass and sparks. I fumbled with the locks in the dark. Deadbolt, chain, handle. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages. I couldn't get the chain to slide. I felt something grab the back of my shirt. Cold. So cold, it burned my skin through the fabric like dry ice. I ripped forward with everything I had. I heard the fabric tear. I heard the screech of the shadow thing. I burst out into the hallway of the building, slamming the door behind me. I heard a heavy thud against the door from the inside, then scratching, frantic, deep scratching that sounded like knives on wood. I ran up the stairs, 2 at a time, tripping, falling, skinning my knees, getting up again. I didn't stop until I burst out onto the street. It was raining again. I stood in the middle of the sidewalk, panting, shirtless, bleeding from a long scratch on my back, the rain mixing with the blood. I looked like a maniac. I didn't go back down there. I called the police from a 24-hour bodega down the block. I told them someone broke in. I sounded crazy, hysterical, rambling about bandages and shadows. When the cops arrived, 2 burly officers went downstairs with flashlights drawn and guns out. I waited at the top of the stairs, shivering in the rain. They came back up 10 minutes later, holstering their weapons. They looked annoyed. "Apartment's empty, son," the older officer said, clicking his pen. "No sign of a break-in. But you got a mess down there. TV's on the floor. Vent cover is unscrewed. Light bulbs are blown. Looks like you had a party." "Did you check the vent?" I asked, grabbing his arm. "Did you look inside?" He shook me off. "Yeah, it's just a heating duct. Goes to the furnace room. It's too small for a person to fit in. Maybe a rat, but not a person, and definitely not a 7-foot shadow." "I saw it," I said. "It came out of there. The bandaged thing came out of the vent. The shadow was behind me." The officer looked at me with pity. He wrote something in his notebook. I saw him circle the word mental. "Maybe you need to get checked out, kid," he said softly. "There's a lot of black mold in these old basements. Makes people hallucinate. Seen it before. Carbon monoxide, maybe. Go to the hospital." They left. I moved out the next day. I refused to go back inside alone. I hired a moving company to grab my boxes, but I left the TV. I told them to leave it on the floor. I left my deposit. I didn't care about money anymore. I stayed on a friend's couch for a week, unable to sleep without the lights on. I flinched at every shadow. Then I found a new place, a third-floor apartment in a newer building across town. No basement, lots of windows, electric baseboard heating, no vents. I thought I was safe. I really did. I thought the signal was stuck in that basement, bound to that cursed TV. But yesterday, I was walking past an electronics store downtown. It was a high-end place with a huge wall of flat-screen TVs in the window, all playing the same 24-hour news channel. As I walked by, the hairs on my arms stood up. Every single TV screen flickered in unison. The news anchor's face distorted, stretched, and disappeared. The screens turned blue. 50 shades of electric blue staring at me from behind the glass. Then the grainy black and white image appeared on all 50 screens. The passers-by didn't seem to notice. They kept walking, eyes on their phones, ignoring the glitch. The hallway, the checkered floor, the bandaged figure stood in the center. Its gown was tattered now, hanging in shreds. It stepped closer to the camera. It raised a long, bony finger and pointed directly at the camera lens, directly at me. Then text appeared on the screen, written in jagged white letters that looked like scratches on the film. "We are still below." I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I locked myself in my new apartment. I have covered the electrical outlets with duct tape. I have piled furniture against the door. I threw my phone in the sink filled with water. But it's getting quiet in here, too. Quiet. And 5 minutes ago, my laptop, which was closed and powered down on the coffee table, turned on. The lid didn't open. The screen just illuminated, shining blue light through the gap between the keyboard and the screen. Then the speakers crackled. The humming. I opened the laptop. I had to know. A video file was playing. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. It's a video of me, sleeping, in my new bed, taken from a high angle, directly above my head, as if the camera is inside the ceiling. I can see myself tossing and turning in the sheets, oblivious. And in the corner of the room, standing in the shadows where the wall meets the ceiling, is the tall, dark figure with red eyes. It is watching me. It is taller than the room. Its head is bent against the ceiling, and crouching at the foot of my bed is the bandaged thing. It is stroking my leg with a long gray finger. The video ends. I hear a sound from the ceiling. Creak! There are No vents in this apartment. But the drywall above my head is cracking. A hairline fracture is spreading across the pristine white ceiling. White dust is falling on my keyboard like snow. Something's pushing through the plaster. I can see the outline of fingers pressing against the paint from the other side. I have nowhere left to run. And the humming has started again. It's coming from the walls. It's coming from the floor. It's coming from inside my head. If you're reading this, do not buy used electronics. Do not look for signals in the static. And if you see a blue screen, run. Just run. That's the end of this story. Now we move on. My shadow moves before I do and sometimes walks away without me. I took the apartment on Sycamore Street because the rent was $400 a month. Utilities included, no credit check. The listing photo showed sunlit hardwood floors and a clawfoot tub. Lies. All of it. When I turned the key in the rusted lock that first evening, the smell hit me first. Damp plaster, mildew, and something underneath like forgotten meat left in a closed cupboard. The hardwood was linoleum cracked like desert earth. The tub was porcelain stained and ringed with grime. The only light came from a single bare bulb hanging over the kitchen sink, casting long, leaping shadows that made the peeling floral wallpaper seem to writhe. Mr. Varga, the superintendent, handed me a key taped to a note that read, "Don't trust the quiet spots. They listen." He didn't explain, just shuffled off down the hall, his own shadow stretching unnaturally long down the peeling wallpaper before he even reached the stairwell. I told myself it was the flickering bulb, the stress of the divorce, the 3 nights I'd slept in my car. The first time I noticed, it was day 3. I was making coffee at 6:03 a.m., the only sound the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of the leaky faucet into a chipped bowl. I reached for the mug on the counter. My shadow on the wall, cast by the weak dawn light filtering through the grimy window, reached first. Not by much. Half a second. A flicker. My hand froze mid-air. I stared at the shadow hand, still extended toward the mug while my own hung suspended. I blinked. The shadow snapped back into place. Stress, I told myself. Sleep deprivation. You're seeing things. I drank the coffee black, bitter, and tried to forget. It happened again that night. 11:48 p.m., I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom mirror, the fluorescent light buzzing like a trapped fly. As I raised the toothbrush, my reflection moved. But my shadow on the far wall, thrown by the hallway light, bleeding under, the door lowered its arm, slowly, deliberately, like it was refusing. I spun around. The hallway was empty, dark. I checked the mirror. My own eyes were wide, pupils blown with fear. But in the glass just over my shoulder, my shadow stood perfectly still on the bathroom wall, arm lowered, head tilted at an angle I hadn't made. I started watching it, obsessively. I'd stand under streetlights on my way home from the overnight data entry job, studying the pavement. My shadow would step off the curb before my foot touched the asphalt. It would turn its head toward alleyways I hadn't noticed. Once, crossing the street at Elm and 5th, a delivery van ran a red light. I froze. My shadow didn't. It kept walking, gliding smoothly into the path of the oncoming headlights, then dissolving into smoke just as the tires screeched to a halt inches from where it had been. The driver yelled, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My shadow reformed at my feet, trembling like a leaf in a storm, but when I looked down, it was perfectly still, calm, as if nothing had happened. The apartment became a cage of angles and light. I drew the curtains at dusk, covered the mirrors with sheets, lit every lamp I owned, creating overlapping pools of light to shrink the shadows. But they found the gaps, the space beneath the bed, the corner behind the radiator, the patch of floor where the hallway light didn't reach. That's where it would gather, thicken. I'd wake at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of breathing, not mine, from that dark corner. When I flicked on the light, the shadows would scramble back to my feet, but the air would still smell of wet stone and something metallic, like old blood. Mrs. Gable from next door found me scrubbing the kitchen floor at 2 a.m., sobbing. She'd come to return a borrowed cup of sugar. Her own shadow, cast by the hallway bulb, stood tall behind her, too tall, its head brushing the ceiling. But she didn't seem to notice. "You look like death warmed over, dear," she said gently, setting the cup down. Her eyes flicked to my shadow, huddled small and tight beneath my chair. "It's been clinging close lately, like it's scared." "Scared?" I whispered. "Of what?" "Of the places it's walked without you." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "This building, it's got thin spots, places where the walls between here and there wear thin. Shadows slip through, especially the lonely ones." She touched my wrist. Her fingers were ice. "The last tenant, her shadow left one Tuesday. Just walked out the front door while she was making breakfast. She waited 3 days for it to come back. Then she followed it." Mrs. Gable's own shadow stretched toward the door as she backed away. "Don't let yours go too far, dear. They forget the way back." I locked the door behind her. That night, I sat on the couch with all the lamps blazing, a baseball bat across my knees. 3:16 a.m. The clock on the microwave glowed. The time. I hadn't blinked. I swear I hadn't. But suddenly, I was standing in the hallway. The lights were off. Moonlight striped the floor through the grimy window. My shadow wasn't at my feet. It stood at the apartment door, one hand raised as if to knock. Its back was to me. Its shape was wrong. Too broad at the shoulders, the neck elongated like a stalk. It turned its head. Slowly, the face was mine, but stretched, the mouth a dark slit too wide for the skull. It didn't have eyes, just hollows that drank the moonlight. It opened the door, stepped out into the silent hallway, closed the door softly behind it. I screamed, pounded on the wood. "Come back!" The knob wouldn't turn, locked from the outside. I threw myself against the door until my shoulder ached. Silence, thick, waiting. I slid down to the floor, shaking. The digital clock read 3:49 a.m., 33 minutes gone, erased, like a film reel with frames cut out. When I woke on the couch at dawn, the door was unlocked. My shadow lay small and still beneath me, as if it had never moved. But on the hallway floor, leading from the door to the elevator, were wet footprints. Not mine. Smaller, barefoot. And beside each one, a darker, deeper impression, like the shape of a shadow stepping where no light fell. The walks became routine. Every night at 3:17 a.m., my shadow would peel itself from my feet like old paint and slip out the door. I stopped locking it. What was the point? I'd sit on the edge of the bed, watching the clock, waiting for the moment it would rise. Sometimes it would pause at the door, look back at me with those hollow eye sockets, and place a finger over its lipless mouth. Shh. Other times, it would vanish without a glance, leaving behind the smell of river mud and the sound of distant bells. I followed it once. I waited until it glided through the front door, then crept after it, barefoot on the cold linoleum of the hallway. The stairwell light was out. I used my phone flashlight, the beam cutting a shaky path down the 3 flights. At the bottom, the front door of the building stood ajar. Moonlight spilled through the crack. I pushed it open. The street was empty, silent. No cars, no wind, just the sodium vapor streetlights casting their sickly orange glow on wet pavement. And there, 20 yards ahead, walked my shadow. But it wasn't alone. Dozens of others moved with it, shadows of people I'd never seen. Tall men in old-fashioned suits, women in long skirts, children holding hands, all striding silently down the center of the road. They didn't cast shadows of their own. They were the shadows. My shadow walked among them, its form shifting, growing taller, shedding the shape of me. It turned a corner onto Elm Street, leading the silent procession. I ran after it, my breath ragged in the unnatural quiet. The corner opened onto the old miller's pond. The water was black glass under the moon. The shadow people stood, shoulder to shoulder along the bank, facing the water. My shadow stood at the very edge, its back to me. It raised its arms, not in surrender, in welcome. From the pond's surface, shapes rose, not reflections. Things, darker than the water, slick and glistening, with too many limbs that dripped black liquid onto the shore. They moved toward the shadow people, not walking, but flowing, like oil. My shadow turned its head, not toward the things in the water, toward me, crouched behind a rusted swing set. Its hollow eyes found mine, and it smiled, a wide, splitting grin that showed no teeth, only darkness. It pointed at me, then pointed at the water. "Come!" I ran, all the way back to Sycamore Street. I didn't lock the door. I sat on the floor with my back against it, knees pulled to my chest, until dawn bled gray at the windows. My shadow returned at 5:02 a.m. It slithered under the door, reformed at my feet, and clung to me like a second skin. It felt colder than before, hungrier. The next morning, Mr. Varga found me trying to nail boards over the windows. "They're coming for me," I whispered, hammer trembling in my hand. "The shadows in the pond." He didn't laugh. He just sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering on stone. "You saw the crossing." He pried the hammer from my grip. His own shadow, stretched long by the morning sun, reached out and touched mine. For a second, they merged. "The pond isn't water, boy. It's a door, a thin place. The shadows that walk away, they're not lost, they're called. The things in the water hunger for the shapes of the living. They wear shadows like coats." He spat on the floorboards. "Your shadow's been gone too often. It's learning the taste of the other side. Soon it won't come back at all. Or worse, it'll bring something back with it." "What do I do?" My voice cracked. "Cut the tether." He pulled a rusted pair of shears from his tool belt. The blades were stained dark. "Before the next crossing, at 3:17, when it peels away, cut the thread between you. It'll hurt, like losing a limb, but you'll be free." That night, I sat on the couch with the shears in my lap. The clock ticked toward 3:17. My shadow lay flat and still beneath me, too still. At 3:16:59, it stirred, began to rise. I gripped the shears, the cold metal biting into my palm. As it lifted free of my feet, I saw it, a thin, glistening thread connecting its ankle to mine, like spider silk, like a vein. I raised the shears. My shadow turned, not the stretched, hollow-faced thing from the pond. Me, my face slack with exhaustion, eyes red-rimmed from crying. It held up a hand, not in warning, in pleading, and in its other hand it held a photograph. A photo I hadn't seen in 10 years. Me and Sarah on our wedding day. Sunlight on the courthouse steps. Her smile wide, unbroken. My arm around her waist. Before the pills. Before the lies. Before she left. The shadow me pressed the photo to its chest, then pointed to my own heart. You let go first, its hollow eyes seemed to say. You cut the thread long before I did. The shears fell from my hand. The shadow bowed its head, stepped out the door. I didn't follow it to the pond that night. I sat on the porch steps instead, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. At 4:01 a.m., it returned, not alone. Behind it walked another shadow, smaller, feminine, Sarah's shadow. It held a shadow hand out to mine, not touching, just close. My shadow took it. They stood together on the sidewalk, facing the apartment building, two silhouettes holding hands under the orange light, waiting. I opened the door. Sarah? I whispered. The shadows didn't turn. They couldn't. Shadows don't have voices. But in the silence I heard it, a soft, familiar sigh, the one she used to make when she was trying not to cry. The scent of her lavender shampoo filled the air, sharp and sweet. The shadows didn't enter. They just stood there, guarding the door, keeping the dark things at bay. Mr. Varga found me on the steps at dawn, wrapped in a blanket. He didn't comment on the two shadows standing sentinel beside me. He just handed me a thermos of hot coffee. They're not calling you anymore, he said quietly. They're protecting you, the ones who left. They remember what it's like to be whole. He nodded at my shadow, now standing tall and steady beside Sarah's. The thread's still there, but it's not a tether anymore. It's a bridge. I still wake at 3:17 a.m., not from fear, from habit. I pad to the window, pull back the curtain. In the street below, under the flickering sodium light, they stand, my shadow and Sarah's, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes just close. They watch the road, the pond, the dark corners where the thin places wait. They don't walk away. Not anymore. They stay. Last Tuesday, a new shadow joined them, small, wearing a baseball cap. Ben, Sarah's little brother. He'd drowned in Miller's Pond when he was 12. I never knew him, but his shadow knows mine. It nods when I wave from the window. The apartment still smells of mildew. The faucet still drips. The wallpaper still peels. But the quiet spots don't listen anymore. They're filled with the soft, steady breathing of shadows standing guard. I don't lock the door at night. I leave it unlocked, just in case Sarah's shadow ever wants to come home. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, I hear them, not voices, footsteps, soft, deliberate, walking the perimeter of the building, keeping the darkness out. And when I look down at my own feet in the morning light, my shadow is always there, waiting, ready. It moves when I move now. But sometimes, just for a second, I catch it glancing toward the pond. Its shoulders tense, its head tilts, listening, not to the water, to the silence between the waves. It remembers the taste of the other side, and it knows the hunger never truly sleeps. I don't cut the thread. I feed it with memories, with coffee left on the porch step at dawn, with the photograph I taped to the inside of the front door. We're not whole, not yet, but we're not alone. And in the thin places where the light barely reaches, that's enough for now. The shadows know, they always know. They're waiting for the day the thread becomes a door, and we all step through together. Until then, I leave the lamp on in the hall, for the ones who walk in the dark, for the ones who remember how to come home. And so, this story comes to an end. Let's start another. My house rearranges its rooms and hallways while I sleep. I bought the house on Hemlock Lane because it was the only one I could afford after the divorce. A 2-story Victorian with gingerbread trim peeling like sunburnt skin, sagging porches and windows that winked like half-lidded eyes in the dusk. The realtor, a woman named Finch, with nicotine-stained fingers and breath that smelled of stale coffee, handed me the keys with a tight smile. "It's got character," she'd said, avoiding my eyes as she gestured at the overgrown garden and the boarded-up third-floor windows. "And the price? Well, let's just say the previous owner left in a hurry." She didn't mention why. I didn't ask. The mortgage was manageable. The silence after Sarah left was not. Moving in was chaos. Boxes stacked to the ceilings, dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light, the smell of mildew thick in the air. I started in the kitchen, unpacked mismatched plates, the cheap silverware set from the thrift store. I placed my favorite mug, chipped blue ceramic, a souvenir from a hiking trip with Sarah years ago, on the counter beside the sink. I turned to grab a box labeled pans from the hallway. The trip took maybe 15 seconds. When I turned back, the kitchen was gone, not destroyed. Gone. In its place stretched a narrow study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls. A massive oak desk sat in the center, littered with yellowed papers and brass astrolabes. A green-shaded lamp cast a pool of light on an open ledger. The air smelled of pipe smoke and old paper. My blue mug sat on the desk, perfectly centered on a leather blotter. I stumbled back, heart pounding. "What the hell?" I whispered. I turned around. The hallway behind me was different, too. Darker, longer. The floral wallpaper I'd seen earlier was replaced by deep green damask. A grandfather clock I didn't own stood in the corner, its pendulum swinging with a slow, heavy tock, tock, tock. I ran back through the new hallway, throwing open doors. The bedroom I'd set up was now a library. The living room was a conservatory, filled with towering ferns and the smell of damp earth. The bathroom had become a small tiled laboratory, filled with bubbling glass apparatus and the sharp tang of chemicals. Panic seized me. I tore through the house, searching for something familiar. My suitcase? In a linen closet I didn't remember. My laptop? On a small writing desk in a room papered with faded maps. Nothing was where I'd left it. The house felt watchful. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick, expectant. Then I saw it. On the wall beside the grandfather clock, a small brass plaque I hadn't noticed before, engraved in elegant script. "The house remembers what you forget." I spent that first night wide awake in the map room, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the house settle. The grandfather clock's tock, tock, tock was the only sound. At 3:17 a.m. it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Then a soft groaning began, not the usual creak of old timber, a deep, resonant vibration from the bones of the house itself. Walls shifted, floors sighed. I heard the distant thud of a heavy door closing somewhere deep within the structure. When I crept to the hallway at dawn, the house was different again. The study was gone. The kitchen was back. My blue mug sat on the counter exactly as I'd left it. But the hallway was shorter. The front door was now at the opposite end of the house. The rearrangements became routine, not every night, but often enough to keep me off balance. One morning, I'd wake to find the staircase leading to the attic had vanished, replaced by a narrow spiral stair down into a wine cellar that hadn't existed before. Another night, the bathroom door opened into a sun-drenched solarium filled with blooming orchids. The house never repeated a layout. It was a labyrinth that reshaped itself in my sleep, guided by a logic I couldn't fathom. I tried to document it. A notebook on the kitchen counter. I'd draw the house plan before bed. Kitchen here, stairs there, bedroom up left. In the morning, the layout would be utterly alien. Corridors led to dead ends. Rooms opened into other rooms with no logical connection. Once, I opened a closet to find it was now a small circular chamber with a domed ceiling painted with constellations. In the center stood a telescope pointed at a skylight I'd never seen. The house didn't just move rooms, it remembered. I found Sarah's favorite teacup in a cupboard in the new conservatory, the one with the blue forget-me-nots I thought I'd thrown out after she left. My father's old pocket watch, lost for 20 years, appeared on the mantel of a fireplace in a parlor I'd never entered, and always my blue mug. It would be waiting on a windowsill in a nursery filled with dusty toys, on a drafting table in a room filled with architectural plans, in the center of a grand ballroom with a parquet floor and crystal chandeliers. I asked Mrs. Gable, the elderly neighbor who lived next door in a pristine bungalow, about the house. She was watering her roses, the scent thick and cloying in the warm air. I told her everything, the shifting rooms, the found objects, the brass plaque. She didn't look up, her trowel digging methodically into the soft earth. "The Hemlock House," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It belonged to Silas Thorne, a clockmaker, a man obsessed with time and memory. After his wife Eleanor died in childbirth, he couldn't bear the empty spaces in the house, the silence where her laughter used to be." She finally glanced at me, her pale blue eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "He didn't build more rooms. He taught the house to grieve, to rearrange itself around the hollows, to fill the silence with echoes of what was lost." She patted the soil around a rose bush with finality. "The house doesn't rearrange its rooms, dear. It rearranges your memories. It shows you the spaces you've tried to forget, and it puts the lost things back where it thinks they belong." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair in the current library, facing the hallway. The grandfather clock, which had reappeared, ticked steadily. 3:16 a.m., the pendulum slowed, stopped. The deep groaning began. Walls slid past each other like tectonic plates. Floors tilted and reset. I heard the wet thump of something heavy moving in the walls. Not rats. Something larger, hungrier. When it stopped, I crept into the hall. The library was gone. In its place was a small, neat bedroom, pale yellow walls, a crib in the corner, a rocking chair by the window. On the dresser sat a silver-framed photograph, me and Sarah holding a newborn baby. Our faces were radiant with a joy I hadn't felt in years. On the back of the photo, in Sarah's looping script, "For Lily, our little sunbeam." Lily, the daughter we'd lost. Sarah's pregnancy had ended at 20 weeks. a silent miscarriage in a sterile hospital room. We'd never spoken her name again, never bought the tiny yellow clothes we'd picked out, never let ourselves grieve properly. We just closed that door, buried it deep. The house had found it. Tears blurred my vision. I picked up the photo. The glass was cold, real. In the crib, a small yellow blanket lay neatly folded. I touched it. Soft cotton, real. The scent of baby powder filled the air, and then faintly the sound of a baby's gurgle. I whirled around. The room was empty, but a rocking chair was moving, slowly, gently, as if someone had just stood up. From the hallway, a new sound began, not groaning, singing, a woman's voice clear and sweet, humming a lullaby I'd never heard but knew in my bones. Sarah's voice. I followed it, down a hallway that hadn't been there before, lined with doors that opened into scenes from our past, our wedding day, our first apartment, a picnic by the lake. The singing led me to a door at the end of the hall. It was simple wood, painted white, a brass knob, carved into the wood, the same words as on the plaque. The house remembers what you forget. I turned the knob. The room beyond was dark, not empty, filled with a soft, warm light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. In the center stood Silas Thorne, not a ghost, a man of flesh and blood, dressed in a fine 19th century suit, his face lined with grief, but calm. In his arms he held a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it was peaceful. "You've been running from the hollow," Silas said, his voice gentle. "The house doesn't want to torment you. It wants to hold the hollow for you, to give you back the pieces you cut out to survive." He looked down at the baby in his arms. "We lost our Eleanor, too, to fever. The house showed us this room where she lives, in the memory, in the love, not in the grave." Sarah stepped out of the shadows near the crib, not the Sarah who left me, the Sarah from before, the one who laughed easily, who held my hand during thunderstorms, who dreamed of a house full of children. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "We never said her name, Daniel," she whispered. "We never let her be real. The house remembers her. It's been waiting for us to remember, too." I fell to my knees. The weight of years of unshed grief crashed over me, for Lily, for Sarah, for the life we'd shattered. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry." Sarah knelt beside me, her hand resting on my cheek. Her touch was warm, real. "It's not too late to remember," she said. "The house gives us this, a place to hold the hollow, to fill it with love, not just silence." Silas stepped forward, holding out the baby, not to me, to the space beside me, to the hollow. "Take her," he said, "just for tonight. Remember her name, remember her weight, remember the hope she was." I reached out, my arms closed around empty air, but the feeling was there, the warmth, the soft weight of a sleeping child, the scent of baby powder and new life. I held the memory, the love, the hope that had been buried. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hallway of my own time. Dawn light filtered through a window that hadn't been there the night before. The house was still, quiet, but not empty. In my arms I held a small yellow blanket. I didn't move for a long time, just sat on the floor holding the blanket to my chest, feeling the echo of a weight that had never been there but had always been missing. The house rearranged itself less after that, not because it stopped remembering, but because I stopped running from the memories. I let the hollow be. I spoke Lily's name out loud. I cried for Sarah. I even bought a small framed photo of a sunbeam and hung it in the room that was currently the study. The blue mug still appears in unexpected places. In the greenhouse, on the grand piano, in the ballroom. Once, I found it on the edge of a fountain in a courtyard I'd never seen, filled with koi fish and water lilies. I just pick it up, fill it with tea, and sit wherever the house has placed me that day. Last night, I woke to the familiar groaning, the deep shift of walls. I didn't get up. I just lay in bed, listening. When it stopped, I went to the window. The view was different. Instead of the overgrown garden, I looked out onto a small, tidy yard. A swing set stood under an oak tree. On the swing, for just a second, I saw the silhouette of a little girl with golden hair, laughing as she soared toward the sky. The house is still rearranging, but now it's building something new, something whole. I keep the yellow blanket on my bed, and sometimes on quiet nights I hear a lullaby, not from the walls, from the space beside me. Where the hollow used to be, the house remembers. And now, finally, so do I. This is where the story ends. Let's continue with the next. I dreamed of a tragedy before it happened. Now I dream of something worse. I should have known something was wrong when the streetlights on Elm Street all died at once. Not flickered, not dimmed. One moment they cast their sickly yellow glow on the wet pavement. The next, total darkness. I was walking home from my graveyard shift at the data entry warehouse, collar turned up against the October drizzle, when the lights cut out. The city didn't go silent. Car horns blared, brakes screeched, someone shouted in the distance. But where I stood, beneath the skeletal branches of the old oak tree outside 112 Elm, the darkness was absolute, thick, like being submerged in ink. And in that darkness I heard it, a low rhythmic thrumming deep beneath the asphalt. Not machinery, not traffic, something organic, a heartbeat. I fumbled for my phone. The screen glowed to life, casting my trembling hand in ghostly blue light. As I raised it to call for a ride, the streetlights surged back on, harsh, blinding. I blinked against the glare, lowering my phone. The building was gone. 112 Elm Street, Mrs. Callahan's antique shop, with its dusty bay windows and brass bell above the door, had vanished. In its place yawned a crater. Jagged concrete teeth ringed a pit filled with twisted rebar, shattered glass, and the splintered remains of Mrs. Callahan's prized Chippendale desk. Rain slicked the debris. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. People spilled from neighboring buildings, pointing, screaming. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, my phone still held up, the screen now showing a photo I hadn't taken. The antique shop intact, sunlight streaming through its windows, and in the reflection of the glass, my own face, pale, wide-eyed, watching the moment before the collapse. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. My 3:17 a.m. The time I'd woken from the dream. The dream. It had come 3 nights ago, vivid, unshakable. I'd been standing in Mrs. Callahan's shop, the smell of lemon oil and old paper thick in the air. She was polishing a porcelain doll behind the counter, humming off-key. "Rain's coming, dear," she'd said without looking up. "You can taste it in the stones." Then the floor buckled. Not a tremor, a yawn. The walls folded inward like cardboard. Dust choked the air. I felt the heat of the gas main igniting before I saw the flames, and beneath it all, that same deep, wet thrumming from the earth. I woke gasping at 3:17 a.m., my sheets soaked with sweat, the echo of breaking glass ringing in my ears. I dismissed it as stress, grief. The divorce papers had arrived that afternoon. I reported the dream to the police the next day. Officer Ruiz, a tired man with kind eyes, listened patiently while I stammered about premonitions and feeling the earth move. He patted my arm. Bad dreams after a rough patch, huh? Happens to the best of us. He made a note, filed it, did nothing. Now standing at the edge of the crater, watching firefighters pull a sheet-draped stretcher from the rubble, I understood. Mrs. Callahan was under that sheet. So was Ben from the hardware store next door. So was the stray cat she'd been feeding. 12 people, all gone because no one believed a broken man who dreamed in threes. The news called it a tragic gas leak. The city condemned the block. I moved into a cheap motel on the other side of town, the kind with thin walls and flickering neon signs that painted the ceiling blood red at night. I didn't sleep. I chain-smoked on the rickety balcony, watching the highway blur below, jumping at every siren. The dreams didn't stop. They changed. The first new dream came on the 7th night in the motel. I stood not in a building, but in a forest. Ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, silver in a narrow dirt path. The air smelled of damp earth and something sweetly rotten. At the path's end stood a door, not a house door, a freestanding door, weathered oak bound with iron straps, hanging in mid-air like a picture frame with no wall. Carved into its surface was a symbol, a spiral within a circle, the lines deep and deliberate. From beyond the door came that same thrumming, but slower now, deliberate, hungry. I reached for the iron latch. Cold bit into my palm. As I pulled the door open, not darkness, but light, spilled out, blinding white light, and voices, not human, layered, whispering in a language that scraped the inside of my skull. She's ready. The vessel is empty. Let her in. I woke on the motel floor, my cheek pressed to the sticky carpet, the taste of copper in my mouth. My knuckles were split. Blood smeared the cheap wallpaper beside the bed. On the nightstand, my phone screen was shattered, but still lit. The wallpaper behind it was torn away, revealing the motel's flimsy wallboard. Scratched into the plaster, deep and jagged, was the spiral and circle, symbol from the dream. I didn't call the police this time. I called Dr. Eris Thorne. His office was in a converted Victorian on the edge of the University District. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light. Thorne was in his 70s, with watery eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he poured tea. He'd written obscure papers on temporal precognition and shared dream states before being quietly sidelined by the academic mainstream. I told him everything. The collapse, the motel wall, the door in the woods. He listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on my left wrist. "You have the mark," he said softly when I finished. He pushed back my sleeve. There, circling my wrist like a bruise that never faded, was a faint spiral, the same symbol from the door. "It appears after the first true vision, a tether. The door knows you now." "What door?" My voice cracked. "What is it?" "The between," he murmured, stirring his tea with a silver spoon. "A place outside time, where things that were lost. Wait, not ghosts. Older, hungrier. They feed on grief, on the spaces left when something vital is ripped away. Your divorce, Mrs. Callahan's death, the collapse. Each loss makes the tether stronger. lets them pull you closer. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. The dreams aren't warnings, Daniel. They're invitations. They're testing the lock. I moved out of the motel that day. Thorne found me a room in his own house, a small cluttered space filled with books and ticking clocks. Walls matter, he'd said. Old walls, strong walls, and time. Keep time moving. The between hates the tick of a clock. I slept under a quilt stitched with silver threads Thorne claimed were warding patterns. For 3 nights, the dreams stopped. I slept deeply, the house's grandfather clock in the hall keeping steady time, tick-tock, tick-tock. Then, on the 4th night, the clock stopped. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to silence. Not the absence of sound, of thick silence, pressing in like water. The grandfather clock's pendulum hung motionless. The digital alarm on Thorne's desk read 3 point in frozen red numbers. And the smell, wet earth and rotten lilies, filled the room. I wasn't in the spare bedroom. I stood before the door in the woods. Moonlight dappled the mossy ground. The iron latch was cold under my hand. The voices from the other side were louder now, insistent. She's forgotten the taste of sun, the weight of a child's hand. Let her remember the hollow places. Let her in. I wrenched the door open. Not light, not darkness. A room, small, familiar, my childhood bedroom. Sunlight streamed through the window where my old baseball pennants hung. On the bed sat a woman, my mother, young, vibrant, her hair the rich brown it was before the chemo turned it to ash. She held a storybook, her finger tracing the words. "Once upon a time," she whispered, her voice the warm honey I remembered from before the hospital rooms and the beeping machines. "There was a boy who lived in a house with walls so thin the stars could whisper through them. I hadn't seen her like this in 20 years, not since she chose the pills over the pain. I took a step forward, tears blurring my vision. "Mom?" She looked up, smiled, but her eyes were wrong. Pupils too large, black as the space between stars. Her smile widened, stretching her face like old paper. "Daniel?" she breathed, her voice now layered with that guttural, scraping whisper. "We've missed the shape of you, the hollow where your heart used to be." She reached out a hand, not to comfort, to claim. Her fingers were too long, too jointed, like roots. "Come home, son. The house is waiting. The walls remember your tears. The floorboards remember your footsteps. We remember the space you left when you stopped believing in us." I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. The iron latch burned my palm. I ran down the moonlit path, branches tearing at my clothes, the voices rising behind me in a chorus of rage and hunger. "She's mine! The vessel is mine! Let her drink the hollow!" I woke on Thorne's rug, dawn light bleeding through the curtains. He knelt beside me, a silver pocket watch clutched in his trembling hand. Its ticking filled the room, steady, calm. The spiral mark on my wrist pulsed hot. "It's accelerating," he said, his face ashen. "The between doesn't just want your grief, Daniel. It wants your life, your memories, your body. It's using your mother's shape because that hollow is the deepest, the hungriest." He pressed the pocket watch into my hand. Cold metal bit into my skin. "This belonged to my wife. It holds time, real time. Carry it. Sleep with it under your pillow. It will slow the tether." That night, the watch worked. The dreams were distant, muffled. But at 3:16 a.m., the ticking stopped. The watch's hands froze at 3:17. The spiral on... My wrist flared white hot, and the door slammed open in my mind. This time, I didn't run. I stood in the threshold of my childhood bedroom. My mother, the thing wearing my mother, rose from the bed. Her dress was now woven from shadow and cobwebs. Her eyes were pits of starless void. Behind her, the walls bled black liquid, the floorboards lifted like tongues. "You think time protects you?" she hissed, the voice no longer layered, pure hunger. "Time is a thread. We are the scissors." She pointed at the pocket watch in my hand. It dissolved into dust. "You are already hollow, Daniel. The divorce, the collapse, the pills your mother took, you let them go. You let the hollows form. We live in the hollows." She stepped closer. The scent of lilies turned cloying, sweet with decay. "We can fill the hollows, give you back the warmth of her hand, the sound of her laugh. All you must do is let us wear your skin, just for a little while. Let us walk in the sun again." I looked past her, at the room, at the baseball pennants, at the small desk where I had done homework, at the closet door left ajar, darkness spilling from its crack. This wasn't just a dream. It was a memory. My memory, the night I'd found the empty pill bottle on her nightstand, the night I'd screamed until my throat bled, the night I'd stopped believing in happy endings. The hollow wasn't just grief, it was guilt, the guilt of surviving. "No," I whispered, then louder, "No, you don't get her. You don't get me." I turned and ran, not down the forest path, but through the bedroom wall. Plaster gave way like smoke. I sprinted down a hallway that shifted and warped. A hallway from Mrs. Callahan's shop one moment, the motel corridor the next, the sterile, white corridor of the hospital where my mother died the next. Behind me, the thing that wore my mother shrieked, its voice shattering glass, splintering wood. "The hollow is hungry. The door is open. She belongs to us." I burst through a final door and tumbled onto Thorne's living room rug. Dawn light streamed through the windows. He stood over me, holding not a pocket watch, but a small, tarnished bell. Its chime was sharp, clear, cutting through the lingering scent of rot. "You fought it," he breathed, helping me sit up. His eyes were wide with awe and fear. "No one fights the hollows." "The door," I gasped, clutching my wrist. The spiral mark was dark, almost black. "It's still open in me." Thorne nodded slowly. "The tether is stronger than I thought. Daniel, the between doesn't just want to wear your skin. It wants to be you, to walk in your grief, to feed on the hollows you carry, and it will keep coming every night until it wins." He placed the bell in my hand. "This is all I have left. My wife's doorbell from when we were happy. It holds the sound of home. Ring it when the silence comes. It will buy you time." That night, I didn't sleep in Thorne's house. I drove to the crater on Elm Street. Rain fell steadily, turning the rubble to mud. I stood at the edge, the bell clutched in my fist, the spiral on my wrist throbbing like a second heartbeat. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., the city lights blurred through the rain. At 3:16 a.m., the silence fell. The crickets stopped. The distant traffic died. Even the rain seemed to pause mid-fall. The earth beneath my feet began to thrum, deep, wet, hungry. The crater's edge crumbled, not collapsing inward, opening like a mouth. From the darkness within, shapes emerged, not ghosts, shadows with too many limbs, eyes like cold stars, and leading them, gliding over the rubble on bare, root-like feet, was my mother. Her dress was mud and shadow. Her smile was a crack in the world. Daniel, she sighed, the sound carrying the weight of drowned cities. You came home. The house remembers your footsteps. I raised the bell. Its chime cut the silence. Bright, pure, the sound of a sunny porch on a summer afternoon. The shadows recoiled, hissed. My mother's form flickered, the mud on her dress bubbling like tar. That sound, she whispered, hatred twisting her borrowed face. The sound of living. We hate the sound of living. But the chime faded. The shadows surged forward. I rang the bell again and again, each chime weaker than the last. The bell's metal grew hot, brittle. On the fourth ring, it shattered in my hand. My mother stood before me, close enough to touch. Her breath smelled of deep earth and forgotten graves. The hollow is so deep in you, my son, she whispered, her hand, cold, root-like, brushing my cheek. You let her go. You let them all go. You think time heals. Time is a thread. We are the scissors. She leaned close, her void black eyes filling my vision. Let us in. We will fill the hollow with warmth, with her laugh, with the sun on your face when you were 10 years old. Just let us wear your skin, just for a little while. I closed my eyes, not in fear, in surrender, not to her, to the memory. I remembered my mother's real face, the lines around her eyes when she laughed, the way she hummed off-key while cooking Sunday gravy, the scent of lavender soap on her skin. I remembered holding her hand in the hospital, not with guilt, but with love. I remembered the fullness of her, not the hollow she left behind. You don't get her, I whispered. You don't get the hollow. You don't get me. I opened my eyes, not at the thing wearing my mother, at the crater, at the wet, broken earth, at the twisted rebar that had been Mrs. Callahan's shop, at the lives lost. I didn't feel guilt. I felt sorrow, deep, heavy, but real. Not a hollow to be filled, but a space to be honored. The thing that wore my mother screamed, a sound that cracked the asphalt beneath my feet. Its form dissolved into swirling shadows. The other shapes shrieked, melting back into the crater's darkness. The thrumming faded. The rain began to fall again. But the spiral on my wrist didn't fade. It burned brighter, deeper. I drove back to Thorne's house as dawn bled into the sky. He stood on the porch, waiting. He didn't ask what happened. He just nodded at my wrist. It's part of you now, the tether, the door. What do I do? My voice was raw. You live, he said simply. You carry the hollows, but you fill them with life. Not just grief, not just memory, real things, warm things, the taste of coffee, the weight of a book in your hands, the sound of birds at dawn. He placed a small, smooth stone in my palm, river-polished, cool. Hold this when the silence comes. Remember the weight of the real world. I stayed with Thorne. I got a job shelving books at the university library. I drank too much coffee. I learned the names of the sparrows that nested in his eaves. The dreams didn't stop, but they changed. Sometimes at 3:17 a.m., I stand before the door in the woods. The iron latch is cold. The thrumming is faint. I touch the spiral on my wrist. I hold the river stone. I think of the sparrow's song, the smell of old paper in the library, the warmth of Thorne's kitchen on a winter morning. The door doesn't open, but last night it rattled, not from the other side, from within me. A voice, my own voice, but hollow, starved, whispered through the cracks. The sparrow's song is so loud. The coffee is so warm. Let me taste it just once. Let me wear your skin for 1 hour. I'll give it back. I swear on the hollow. I didn't answer. I held the river stone tighter. felt its solid, unchanging weight. I thought of the sparrow building its nest, of Thorn's laughter over burnt toast, of the real, living world. The rattling stopped, but the spiral on my wrist pulsed once, like a heartbeat. I know what's coming. The between doesn't give up. It waits. It hungers. It knows the hollows in me better than I do. It knows I still dream of my mother's laugh, of Mrs. Callahan polishing that porcelain doll, of the warmth of Sarah's hand in mine before the divorce papers came. It knows the hollows never truly fill, and it's right. But the stone is heavy in my pocket. The sparrow sings outside my window. Thorn is making pancakes downstairs, humming off-key. The door will rattle again tonight at 3:17 a.m. I'll be ready. I'll hold the stone. I'll remember the weight of the world. And I'll whisper back, the hollows are mine. The warmth is mine. The skin is mine. But part of me, the small starved part that still tastes the pills on my mother's breath, that still hears the gas main ignite under Elm Street, that still feels the divorce papers like shards of glass in my chest. Part of me wants to turn the latch just once to see if the hollow could be filled, to see if the thing wearing my mother's face could, for one stolen hour, make the world feel whole again. The stone is heavy, but hunger is heavier. I hear the sparrow sing. I taste the coffee. I touch the spiral on my wrist. And I wait for 3017. As this story comes to rest, a new whisper begins. The man I see in my dreams is now appearing in reflections around me. I moved into the Willow Street apartment because it was the only place I could afford after the layoff. The rent was suspiciously low for a one-bedroom in the city, but the listing photo showed sunlit hardwood floors and a clawfoot tub in the bathroom, a relic in this neighborhood. The landlord, Mrs. Gable, was a brisk woman in her 60s who met me at the door with a clipboard and keys. Utilities included, but the hot water's temperamental, she'd said, not making eye contact. And the mirrors, well, they're old. Don't stare too long. I laughed it off as eccentricity. The apartment itself was charmingly shabby. High ceilings, dusty crown molding, and those floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room that flooded the space with afternoon light. The bathroom mirror, framed in tarnished silver, was huge, almost swallowing the entire wall above the tub. It felt like a stage for solitude. I didn't think much of it. Mirrors were just glass and backing until the dreams started. It began 3 nights after I moved in. I dreamed of a man standing at the foot of my bed, not threatening, just present. He wore a dark, old-fashioned suit, like something from the 1940s, with a high collar and no tie. His face was gaunt, pale as skim milk, with deep-set eyes that held no light. He never spoke. He just watched me sleep. I'd wake gasping, drenched in sweat, the digital clock on my nightstand always reading 3:17 a.m. The first time, I blamed stress. The second, bad takeout. By the third night, a cold certainty settled in my gut. He was real in the dream. Not a shadow, not a blur. His suit had a subtle pinstripe. His left hand was tucked into his pocket. The right hung loose, fingers slightly curled. I could see the chipped paint on his thumbnail. When I woke, the room felt colder, the silence heavier, as if the air itself had been holding its breath. Then came the reflections. I was brushing my teeth one Tuesday morning, still half asleep, when I caught movement in the bathroom mirror. just a flicker at the edge of my vision. I turned, expecting Mrs. Gable's cat, which sometimes prowled the fire escape, but the window was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, my own tired face stared back, but behind my shoulder, deep in the reflection of the hallway, a shape stood in the doorway. Tall, thin, wearing a dark suit. My blood turned to slush. I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty hallway. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the warped old glass, sleep deprivation. I took a photo with my phone to prove it was nothing. The image showed only my startled face and the empty doorway behind me. But that night, scrolling through my gallery, I zoomed in on the mirror's reflection in the photo. There, barely visible in the smudged glass, was the faint outline of a man's shoulder and the edge of a stiff collar. I stopped using the bathroom mirror after that. I'd wash my face hunched over the sink, eyes squeezed shut, or use the tiny magnifying mirror on the inside of the medicine cabinet. But the reflections found other surfaces. The window above the kitchen sink became a nightmare. One evening, as I washed a plate, the city lights outside cast a dim glow through the glass. In that reflection, superimposed over the dark silhouette of the apartment building across the street, stood the man, not in the hallway this time, right behind me in the kitchen. I dropped the plate. It shattered on the floor. I whirled around, heart hammering against my ribs. The kitchen was empty. Only the broken ceramic at my feet and the drip of the faucet. I took another photo. Again, the image showed nothing but my own pale, terrified face and the ordinary kitchen behind me. But later, zooming in on the window's reflection, within the photo, I saw him. Clearer this time. His gaunt face, those depthless eyes fixed not on the camera, but on me in the reflection. His right hand was no longer curled. It was pressed flat against the glass from the other side. I started documenting everything, screenshots of the zoomed-in anomalies in my photos, notes in my phone. 3:17 a.m. Dreamt of him again. Felt cold spot near closet after waking. Octa 12. Saw reflection in toaster window while making breakfast. Faint outline of hat brim. I showed the photos to my sister Maya over video call. She squinted at her screen. "Babe, that's just a shadow or a glitch. Your phone camera's cheap." She paused. "You look exhausted. Are you sleeping?" I wasn't. I'd started sleeping with the lights on, the hallway lamp burning all night. I piled chairs against the bedroom door, a flimsy barrier against a man who only existed in glass and dreams. Maya made me promise to see a doctor. I scheduled an appointment for Monday. Anything to feel normal. The breaking point came on Saturday night. A storm rolled in, lashing rain against the windows, turning the glass into rippling, distorted mirrors. The power flickered, died, then surged back with a groan. I was in the living room trying to read by candlelight when lightning flashed. For a split second, the entire room was bleached white. In that frozen instant, every window, every dark TV screen, every polished surface became a mirror. And in every single one, he was there. Not just in the reflections of the room, he was in the reflections themselves. In the rain-streaked window, he stood on the fire escape outside, pressed against the glass, his face flattened grotesquely against the pane. In the dark screen of the turned-off television, he sat cross-legged on my sofa, watching me read. In the shiny surface of the candlestick holder, his tiny, distorted face peered up at me. He wasn't behind me anymore. He was everywhere. The light caught a surface, The thunderclap that followed shook the walls. I screamed, dropping the candle. Wax splattered the floor. I fumbled for my phone, trembling so badly I could barely unlock it. I opened the camera, pointed it at the nearest window. The flash fired. The photo was a mess of rain and glare, but in the center, clear as a knife cut, was his face. Not a shadow, not a trick. His left eye had a cataract, a milky film over the iris. I'd never noticed that detail before. It was real. He was real. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor in the corner farthest from all windows and mirrors, knees drawn to my chest, phone clutched like a talisman, the flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the dark. I stared at the bathroom door. It was closed. The huge mirror was behind it. Safe. At 3:17 a.m., the digital clock on the microwave glowed the time through the kitchen doorway. My eyelids grew heavy despite the adrenaline. Just for a second, I must have drifted, because I woke to a sound, not thunder, a soft, rhythmic tap, 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 like a fingernail on glass. It was coming from the bathroom. I didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe. The tapping continued, deliberate, patient. Tap, 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 tap. It synced with my pulse. I forced myself up, my legs numb. I crept down the hall, each floorboard groaning under my weight. The bathroom door was still closed. The tapping stopped. Silence, thick and waiting. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. I took a deep breath, gripped the cold brass knob, and yanked the door open. The bathroom was empty. The small window was latched. Rain streamed down the outside. The claw-foot tub sat in shadow. And the mirror was covered. Mrs. Gable had left an old floral bedsheet draped over it when I moved in, tucked tightly around the frame. I'd forgotten. Relief washed over me so intense I almost wept. He couldn't get in. The sheet was a barrier. I leaned against the doorframe, letting out a shaky breath. Then I saw it. At the very bottom edge of the sheet, where it brushed the floor, a single drop of water had fallen from the damp window ledge above. It landed on the sheet's hem and spread. Not clear water, a dark, viscous red, like old blood. I backed out of the bathroom, slamming the door shut. I locked it. I dragged my desk chair from the bedroom and wedged it under the knob. It wasn't enough. I needed to see. I needed proof it wasn't just me unraveling. I remembered Mrs. Gable's offhand comment, "Don't stare too long." I called her at 4:03 a.m. Her voice was thick with sleep and irritation. "What now? Burst pipe?" "It's the mirror," I whispered, my voice raw. "The man in the mirror. He's—" She cut me off. Her tone shifted, not angry, resigned, heavy. "Oh, it started for you?" A long pause. The sound of a match striking. That apartment. It belonged to my grandfather, Arthur Gable. He was a watchmaker, quiet man. Died in that bathroom in 1947. Heart attack, they said. But he'd been unwell, paranoid. Said a man watched him in the mirrors. A man who didn't belong. Grandfather covered all the mirrors with sheets. Stopped leaving the apartment. One night, the neighbors heard screaming. When they broke down the doors, he was in the tub, fully clothed. The mirror was uncovered, and he'd tried to break it with his bare hands. Glass everywhere, cuts all the way up to his elbows. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They found a note, just 2 words. He followed. The man in the mirror, he doesn't just watch, dear. He replaces. Slowly. He takes the spaces where you're not looking, where the light doesn't reach, where you forget to check. I hung up. The chair under the bathroom knob felt flimsy as paper. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the hallway, back against the bedroom door, facing the bathroom. The sheet-covered mirror was a pale ghost in the dark. I didn't sleep. At dawn, weak gray light seeped through the living room windows. I called Maya, told her everything. She came over within the hour, took one look at my face, and didn't argue. "We're getting you out of here, now." She helped me throw clothes into a suitcase. I avoided the bathroom, avoided every reflective surface. When I grabbed my toothbrush from the kitchen sink, I kept my eyes down, focused on the drain. But as I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the dark oven door, and behind my shoulder, in that small, curved surface, tall and still in his dark suit, stood Arthur Gable's watcher. His head was tilted. His cataract-clouded eyes seemed to follow me as I backed away. Maya drove me to her place. Her apartment was modern, minimalist, no large mirrors, just small ones in the bathroom and a polished stainless steel kettle. I felt safe. For 3 days, I slept on her couch, lights blazing. I didn't dream of the man. I started breathing again. On the 4th morning, over strong coffee, Maya suggested I look for a new place. "Somewhere with no mirrors," I joked weakly. She smiled, turning to fill the kettle at the sink. As she did, the morning sun hit the curved metal surface of the kettle. It wasn't a flat reflection. It distorted, stretched. But in that distortion, standing just behind Maya's shoulder in the reflection, was a gaunt figure in a pinstripe suit. His hand wasn't in his pocket. It was resting lightly on Maya's reflected shoulder. His head was bent close to her ear, as if whispering. His cataract eye gleamed dully in the warped metal. I didn't scream. I didn't move. Maya turned, kettle in hand. "You okay? You're white as a sheet." "Fine," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Just tired." She frowned, but let it go. After she left for work, I locked myself in her tiny bathroom. The mirror above the sink was small, framed in chrome. I covered it with a towel, but in the shower later, the glass door fogged unevenly. Where condensation didn't cling, clear patches formed. In one patch, near the bottom, a section of dark trouser leg was visible. In another, higher up, the sharp line of a suit jacket collar. I turned off the water, shivering in the steam. I wiped the glass clear with my hand. For a second, the entire door was transparent. And in that reflection, standing directly behind where I'd been, water dripping from his hair, his suit soaked through, stood the man. His lips were slightly parted, not smiling, not frowning, waiting. His right hand was raised, palm flat against the glass, exactly where my shoulder had been moments before. I moved out of Maya's that afternoon. I couldn't do that to her. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, generic, modern, with plastic fixtures and a tiny mirror glued to the back of the door. I covered it with a T-shirt. The room smelled of bleach and stale cigarettes. That night, I slept fitfully. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to the hum of the neon sign outside buzzing through the thin walls, and to a new sound, soft, wet, like bare feet on linoleum. Slick, slick, slick. It was coming from the bathroom. The door was closed. I held my breath. The sound stopped. Silence. Then a slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap on the bathroom door. Not fingernail on wood, fingertip on glass, on the mirror behind the door. I didn't open it. I packed my bag in the dark and fled to my car. I drove until dawn, stopping at a roadside rest area. Exhaustion pulled at my bones. I reclined the seat, just for an hour. Just until the sun was fully up, I must have slept. I woke to weak sunlight glinting off the dashboard. And in the side view mirror, angled towards the driver's seat, I saw him. Not a reflection of parking lot behind me, him, sitting in the passenger seat. His dark suit, stark against the gray upholstery, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his cataract eye fixed on my sleeping face in the mirror. His lips moved. No sound came through the glass, but I read the shape of the words clearly. Almost home. I haven't slept in a bed since. I move constantly. Motels, bus stations, park benches at dawn. I avoid glass. Cover any reflective surface with cloth, tape, my hands. But he's always there. In the dark window of an abandoned storefront as I walk past. In the polished hood of a parked car. In the screen of my dying phone when I check the time. He's closer now. Sometimes, in the reflection, his hand isn't just pressed to the glass. His fingers are through it, slightly, as if the barrier is thinning. Last night, in a 24-hour diner with windows fogged from the rain, I caught my reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. And in that tiny, curved surface, he wasn't behind me. He was standing beside my reflection, his shoulder almost touching the reflection of mine, his head tilted towards my reflected ear. And this time, when his lips moved, I heard it. A dry whisper that didn't come from the dispenser, but from the air right beside my actual ear, cold as grave soil. The gaps are smaller when you're tired. Let go. I'll keep watch. I dropped the coffee cup. Hot liquid splashed my hands, but I barely felt it. I ran. I'm writing this now in the public library under the harsh fluorescent lights. I keep my head down. I don't look at the glass doors, but I can feel it, the exhaustion pulling at my eyelids, the way the light on the librarian's eyeglasses catches and glints, the smooth, dark surface of the computer monitor in front of me. It's only a matter of time before I close my eyes. Just for a second. And when I open them, I know what I'll see in the black screen, not my own face, his, waiting in the reflection. Closer than before, his hand no longer on the glass, resting on the shoulder of my reflection, ready to step through the gap I leave when I sleep, the gap where the light doesn't reach, the gap where I forget to check. He's almost home, and home is wherever I close my eyes.